What if the greatest story ever told doesn't start with once upon a time, but with a descent into darkness? We journey from chaos to light, an ancient road that built civilizations and still echoes deep within our modern minds. These ancient scriptures are more than history. They are a psychological blueprint of our eternal struggle to find meaning. A drama of fractured heroes, dark forces, and terrifying encounters with the unknown. Why would a father almost slay his own child? How did a simple shepherd stand against the greatest empire of his age? What drove a golden kingdom to ruin in just 3 generations? From creation to exile, we trace the tiny hidden choices that spark massive consequences. We watch impossible promises unfold in ways no one saw coming, showing how a broken people carried a spark of hope for us all. Step inside a world where gardens speak of lost innocence, great floods offer terrifying new starts, ruined towers divide our speech, and a small forgotten tribe in the desert becomes the burning center of a mystery that still defines human destiny. This is the haunting story of the Scriptures, a place where the sacred collides with our dirty reality, where the divine and human intertwine, and where the deep past mirrors who we are right now. We begin at the absolute origin of all things, the very dawn of existence. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 tells us, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Before this moment, there was only a vast, eternal presence without start or finish. By a deliberate act of will, He spoke our reality into being. The text describes an earth that was initially formless, blank, and cold, with heavy darkness brooding over the deep abyss, while the breath of God hovered above the waters. In this silent void, the Creator spoke, "Let there be light." Genesis records that when the word was spoken, light instantly shattered the darkness, and God saw that the light was good, separating it from the dark. This first day carved out a cosmic law. God speaks, matter yields, and the Maker calls it good. On the second day, He divided the deep waters, stretching out the sky like a vast dome over the earth. The third day brought 2 monumental shifts. First, the waters receded to let solid ground rise up. Then He ordered the barren earth to bring forth living green. This new life held an internal code, designed from the start to reproduce its own kind. The fourth day ignited the sun, moon, and stars to pierce the dark and govern our seasons and time. On the 5th day, the seas and skies swarmed with wild, breathing life. On the 6th day, the land welcomed beasts of every shape, followed by the absolute crown of creation, humanity. Finally, on the 7th day, God rested. Not because He was tired, but to weave a rhythm of peace into the cosmos. This holy rest founded the Sabbath, a sacred pause for restoration. But the creation of man was painted in entirely different colors. We were not just spoken into being. We were crafted to reflect the very nature and likeness of God. The text reveals a divine counsel. Let us make man in our image, to mirror our likeness, and let them watch over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the wild beasts, and all the earth, every living creature that moves across the ground. So God created humanity in His own image, shaping them to reflect Him. Male and female, He created them. 2 profound mysteries hide here. First, that plural invitation let us make, hinting at a deep counsel within the divine. Second, the truth that both man and woman equally bear this holy spark. This resemblance gives humanity its infinite worth, dignity, and a weight of responsibility. The second chapter reveals that God sculpted man from the dust of the cold earth, breathing His own warm breath into his lungs, and the clay became a living soul. It paints the picture of a potter tenderly molding his masterpiece. What brought this dust to life was no cold spoken command, but an intimate shared breath of life. Once the first man stood, God prepared a sacred sanctuary for him. A garden planted in the east in a land called Eden, where he placed the fragile creature he had just formed. Eden was a sanctuary of wild abundance. Here in this perfect peace, humanity was given its true calling to care for the earth and protect it. Labor was never meant to be a curse or a punishment, but a gift designed to partner with the Creator in keeping the world alive. Yet with this vast freedom came a single warning about the tree of knowledge. This sole boundary in a world of endless grace set the stage for the human drama of choice. But even in paradise there was a void. God whispered, "It is not good for man to be alone." After parading every beast before the man to be named, no true partner was found. So God provided the answer. The Creator cast a heavy sleep over him. As he slept, God took one of his ribs and sealed the flesh. From that rib the Creator fashioned a woman, building her from his very side, and then he brought her to him. Adam's immediate cry reveals a profound shock of recognition. "This is bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." This ancient love song celebrates their perfect unity. What was life like in this untouched paradise before the fall? Scripture offers us a rare window into an existence defined by harmony at every level between humanity and the divine, between man and woman, and between us and creation. Their connection with God was deeply intimate. Genesis chapter 3 verse 8 speaks of God walking in the garden during the cool of the evening, revealing a tangible, living presence. There were no walls, no spiritual distance. Communion was effortless. Between the man and woman, absolute transparency reigned. Genesis chapter 2 verse 25 states that the man and his wife were both naked, yet they felt no shame. This unmasked vulnerability points to a bond free from armor, free from emotional hiding, and empty of protective social masks. Their connection to the earth was defined by gentle care, not exploitation or bitter struggle. Labor in the garden was never a burden, but deeply satisfying and creative. The soil responded freely to their gentle touch. Death had not yet cast its shadow over creation. Life was defined by overflow, not lack. There was no desperate scramble for resources, no paralyzing fear of tomorrow. The sanctuary offered everything needed for a rich, deep life. Yet this was far from a passive existence without true meaning. Humans held sacred duties, real responsibilities, and the weight of choosing their own path. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil standing at the center of the garden was a clear boundary, a warning that, though made in the divine image, they were not gods themselves. The nearby tree of life offered them physical eternity as a constant choice. Death was merely a distant warning, not the inescapable tragedy it is today. In this pristine world, the couple walked in shalom, that profound, holistic peace enveloping their entire physical, mental, and spiritual self. This was the Creator's true blueprint for our life on this earth. But this perfect harmony was shattered. Genesis chapter 3 introduces a new presence, a serpent far more cunning than any beast of the field. It whispered to the woman, asking, "Did God actually say you must not eat from any tree here?" The deceiver begins with a quiet twist of truth, turning a generous gift into a petty restriction. This psychological manipulation aims to plant a quiet resentment against the Creator. The woman attempts to correct the lie, but she already falters, adding strict rules of her own while downplaying the lethal gravity of consequences. The serpent strikes with flat denial. "You will not die. God knows that the moment you eat of it, your eyes will open. You will be like gods, deciding good and evil. This dark whisper implies that God is hiding something precious from them out of jealousy. The story then captures the quiet internal spiral of temptation. When she saw the fruit was nourishing, beautiful to look at, and alluring for gaining wisdom, she reached out and tasted it. She then offered it to her husband beside her, and he ate. Here we see the triple trap of temptation, physical hunger, aesthetic desire, and intellectual pride. Taking that bite was far more than simple rule-breaking. It was a declaration of total spiritual independence, a rejection of their creator to define right and wrong for themselves. Crucially, we must notice Adam's silence. He stood right there beside her throughout the entire exchange, watching it unfold. Yet he chose not to speak. He abandoned his duty to protect, then willingly joined in the betrayal. The crash was instant. The moment they ate, their eyes were indeed opened only to realize they were naked and exposed. Hurriedly, they stitched fig leaves together to hide themselves. Their new knowledge brought no glorious enlightenment, only the heavy, suffocating weight of vulnerability and shame. Their immediate instinct to cover up represents every desperate attempt we make today to mask our inner brokenness and project a false front of self-sufficiency. The fracture of their choice was instantaneous and devastating. Genesis chapter 3 verse 8 records the first consequence. They heard the approaching footsteps of the Lord. Why do we hide when our conscience speaks? They heard the Creator walking in the cool breeze and fled deep into the shadows. That perfect connection was instantly shattered. In its place came the heavy modern burden of fear, shame, and constant hiding. Then comes the quiet voice. Where are you? It is not a search, but a call to self-reflection, yet we answer with excuses. The man immediately points the finger, blaming both his partner and the divine. The woman you put here with me, she gave it to me. The woman quickly passes the guilt down. The serpent tricked me, she says. And so the cold weight of consequence begins to fall. It starts with the snake. I will put constant war between you and the woman, and between your bloodline and her children. He will crush your head, though you will bruise his heel. This ancient whisper promises that evil will face defeat, but at a terrible price. For the woman, life would bring deep pain in childbirth, alongside a quiet, constant struggle for control and balance in her relationships. The man faced a heavy burden. Work would turn into a grueling struggle against a resistant earth. He would toil until he returned to the dust. Yet even in this dark hour, grace was quietly at work. The Creator made coats of skin to cover their nakedness, offering a sacrifice to shield human shame. Then came the exile. Banishing them from the garden was not just a punishment, but an act of deep mercy. It prevented them from eating of the tree of life, saving humanity from being locked forever in a state of brokenness. The closed garden, guarded by flashing swords, became our shared memory of a lost paradise and the deep ache for home. Beyond the gates of Eden, the human journey truly began, marked by the arrival of the very first children. The ancient texts tell us that Eve gave birth to Cain, declaring, I have brought forth a man with God's help. Soon after his brother Abel was born. Abel became a shepherd, tending flocks under the open sky. Cain, however, worked the soil. These first two brothers represent the fundamental split in how we survive two different but equally valid ways of life. But soon the story shifts to an act of worship. In time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord, a portion of the harvest from the soil. Abel also brought the finest firstborn of his flock. And the Creator looked upon Abel and his offering with favor, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. The ancient story never fully explains why one was accepted and the other cast aside. Was it the quality of the gift? Was it the internal posture of their hearts, or the nature of sacrifice itself? Whatever the reason, the rejection exposed something dark and hidden deep within the heart of Cain. His reaction laid bare his true character. Cain burned with anger, and his face fell into shadow. Then the divine approaches him with a warning, revealing a profound truth about the nature of human sin. Sin crouches at the door, an aggressive, almost living force. We are called to master it, but tragically, Cain rejects this wisdom. He coaxes his brother out into the open field, far from watching eyes. And while they were there, Cain turned on Abel and killed him. The first human death was not from age, but cold, calculated murder, brother against brother. The silence is shattered by a sudden, searching question. Where is your brother Abel? Just like in Eden, the question demands self-awareness. And just like before, it is met with denial. I do not know, Cain snaps. Am I my brother's keeper? Then the heavy verdict falls with a haunting image. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. The soil, already cursed now, grows even more hostile. The tiller of the earth, who stained the dirt with blood, will now find only barren wasteland under his hands. Yet even to this murderer, a strange grace is shown. A protective mark is placed upon him. It ensures that no one who finds him will take his life, revealing a complex, merciful justice. Even in judgment, the cycle of violence is limited. Cain then turns and departs from the presence. He settles in the land of Nod, a name meaning wandering, reflecting his new life as a fugitive. Yet despite this curse, the wanderer managed to establish a life. He married, started a family, and had children. Despite his exile, he managed to build a family. The ancient text reveals that Cain had a son named Enoch. Then he built a city, naming it after his boy, creating a fortress in the wild. This first act of building marks the dawn of human civilization. A city offered security and lasting stability. It provided the community that this condemned wanderer was so desperate to find in his exile. Soon his descendants pioneered the very first technologies and arts, shaping the ancient world around them. They became shepherds living in tents and musicians playing the harp, turning their exile into a new beginning. Zillah gave birth to Tubal-Cain, a master who forged tools of bronze and iron. Here we witness the rise of nomadic herding with Jabal music with Jubal and metalworking with Tubal-Cain. Yet though cut off from the divine presence, Cain's family line showed incredible cleverness and cultural brilliance. A mirror of God's likeness still lingering inside them despite their fall. Yet alongside this external growth came a dark moral rot. Lamech, a fifth-generation descendant of Cain, brought polygamy into the world by taking 2 wives. Even more chilling is his song of the sword in Genesis 4, verses 23 to 24. Have killed a man for wounding me, a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech is avenged 77 times over. This chant exposes an obsession with extreme vengeance and celebrated cruelty. What began as a single tragic act in Cain turned into a lifestyle for Lamech. Here, violence answers minor slights, fueled by pride and the power to destroy. The protective mark God gave Cain in mercy is twisted into an excuse to bleed others. Yet contrasting this dark line, the ancient text reveals a different path. Adam lay with his wife again, and she had a son, naming him Seth. She said, God has granted me another child to replace Abel, whom Cain killed. Genesis 4, verse 25. The name Seth translates to appointed or substituted, establishing him as Abel's spiritual heir. The deep contrast between these 2 split lineages is drawn clearly in Genesis 4, verse 26. A son was also born to Seth named Enoch. Then humanity began to call on the name of the Lord. While Cain's descendants built cities, technology, and art, Seth's family pursued genuine devotion and worship. This profound spiritual divide between the 2 branches would shape the entire course of human history. Genesis 5 presents an astonishing list of ancestors from Adam to Noah, famous for the massive lifespans recorded. These ancient leaders before the flood lived on average over 900 years, with Methuselah living 969 years, the longest recorded life in biblical history. This incredible lifespan might point to a drastically different environment in that early pre-flood world. Perhaps they stood closer to the flawless beauty of creation or fulfilled a unique divine plan to seed humanity. Whatever the reason, these massive lifetimes allowed for a staggering accumulation of wisdom and experience, letting generations overlap for centuries. Within this long family tree of Genesis 5, the echoing line, lived and then died, reminds us of the heavy weight of death brought by humanity's fall. Even with centuries on earth, the cold sentence of mortality remained unbroken. Every elder, no matter how long he walked, ultimately returned to the dust. Yet one figure stands completely apart. Genesis 5, verses 21 to 24 notes Enoch lived 65 years, then fathered Methuselah. After that, Enoch walked with God for 300 years. Suddenly, he was gone, because God took him. Unlike everyone else, Enoch never tasted death. He was caught up, carried straight into the divine presence. What set Enoch apart was his walk with God, the same phrase used to describe Noah. This closeness with the Creator, this sharing of heart and purpose made Enoch a shining light of loyalty in a deeply corrupt era. His abrupt disappearance must have stunned his world, showing that intimate communion with God outlives physical death. Another famous leader in this line is Methuselah, Enoch's son, whose name carries a heavy warning. It likely means when he dies, it comes. This was a prophecy, as his death met the exact year of the flood. His long life of 969 years shows God's infinite patience, offering mercy and space for change before the great flood. This lineage positions Noah directly under Seth in the line of faith, contrasting the brutal, power-hungry families born from Cain. By the time this story returns to Noah in Genesis chapter 6, we already know his character. He is the true spiritual heir of an ancient walk with God. But as the human family grew, darkness and corruption exploded across the earth. Genesis 6 verses 1 and 2 reveals one of the most mysterious passages in the whole Bible. As humans spread and daughters were born, the sons of God saw how beautiful these women were and took any they wanted as wives. The true identity of these sons of God has sparked debate for centuries. Three common views exist. First, fallen angels who took human form. Second, powerful, brutal rulers who kept large harems. Third, Seth's descendants marrying women from Cain's corrupted line, thereby blurring the boundary between the faithful and the faithless, no matter how we interpret it. The outcome was devastating. God saw that human malice had poisoned the entire world, and every urge of the human heart was relentlessly dark. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 reveals not just outward acts of cruelty, but a rot within our very desires, our thoughts, and our deepest motives, warped at the root. The Creator responded with heavy grief, regretting that he had ever formed humanity, and his heart broke. Genesis chapter 6 verse 6. This sorrow does not mean God made a mistake, but shows deep anguish over the corruption of his beloved creation. This human-like language reveals the weight of God's response to human malice. The ultimate judgment would be just as severe. The Creator declared, "I will erase humanity from the earth. I will wipe out every living thing that crawls and flies in the sky, for I regret creating them." Genesis chapter 6, verse 7. This sentence spared no one, sweeping away both humanity and the nature bound to us, a mirror of our deep original connection. In the middle of this total darkness, A single unexpected spark of hope began to shine. But Noah found favor with God. Genesis chapter 6, verse 8. This unearned mercy became the foundation for saving humanity. He is called a righteous man, living with integrity among his peers, walking with God like Enoch before him. Genesis chapter 6, verse 9 doesn't mean he was flawless, but he kept his integrity in a broken world, clinging to his Creator. He lived by faith. Yet history shows that even this man had his own dark struggles and weaknesses. His true strength was his willingness to receive grace, not some illusion of self-made perfection. Faced with global ruin, God shared his plan for rescue and ruin, telling Noah, "I will bring an end to all flesh, for the earth is choked with their violence. I will destroy both them and the world. Build an ark of gopher wood." Genesis chapter 6, verses 13 to 14. The blueprints were incredibly detailed. Seal the timber inside and out with pitch to keep the black waters out. Make it 450 feet long, with 3 decks, a side door, and a single window. This design was built to float, not to sail, prioritizing sheer capacity and stability over speed or control. Erecting this colossal wooden titan on dry ground miles from any ocean must have seemed like pure madness to the watching world. Later, the Apostle Peter called Noah a preacher of righteousness. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5 implies that his decades of labor were a warning of impending doom, urging people to change. Yet every single warning was ignored. Along with the physical plans, God offered a sacred promise. "I will establish my covenant with you, and you will survive inside the vessel, you and your family." Genesis chapter 6, verse 18. This first explicit divine covenant in the Bible sets the enduring pattern for all future relationships between God and humanity, a divine calling, human obedience, and rescue from ruin. This rescue was not just for one family, but also embraced representatives of the entire animal kingdom, bringing a pair of every living creature on earth into the shelter to preserve their lives beside yours. They must be male and female. Genesis chapter 6, verse 19. Clean animals entered in groups of 7 pairs, while others came in single pairs, a design to preserve species and prepare for future sacred worship. Facing these staggering instructions, Noah did exactly what was required of him. He followed every command. Genesis chapter 6, verse 22. His deep trust stood in stark contrast to the chaos of his generation, proving that faith is not just an idea, but a physical choice built on absolute trust. When the massive work was done and the creatures were gathered, God spoke one last time. "Take your entire family and enter the safety of the vessel, for I have found you righteous in this broken age." Genesis chapter 7, verse 1. They stepped inside 7 days before the rains fell, a quiet, tense week of waiting before the disaster. Then the floodwaters came. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, the deep fountains of the earth burst open, the floodgates of heaven tore apart, and the storm raged over the... Does Genesis 7 with 40 days of rain point to something far deeper than a mere storm? It speaks of violent tectonic shifts unleashing deep underground waters to physically reshape our entire world. For 150 days, the floods swallowed the highest peaks, extinguishing all breathing life outside the ark. A cosmic judgment for cosmic corruption. Yet amidst the silent ruins, a whisper of hope remained. God remembered Noah in Genesis 8. This divine remembering does not mean God had forgotten, but rather that he was turning his focus to act. Soon the vast, suffocating deep began its slow, quiet retreat, and the seas receded. The wooden ark rested on the heights of Ararat. Birds flew into the open, searching for dry ground. The entire ordeal lasted over 12 months. After a long year inside that dark sanctuary, the moment came to step outside. Genesis 8 records the call of God telling Noah to step out of the vessel with his wife, his sons, and their wives. The ground was dry, silent, and ready. A brand new world lay before the family God had preserved. His very first act on this new earth was deeply spiritual. Genesis records that Noah built an altar to the Lord, gathering clean animals and birds to offer up as a burning sacrifice upon those freshly laid stones. Even before securing shelter for his own family, Noah prioritized worship. This act recognized both God's immense mercy and the dark reality of human sin, which still lingered in this fresh start. God answered with a promise. Genesis 8 records his decree, "I will never again curse the soil because of man, even though human thoughts are bent on evil from youth. Never again will I strike down all living things. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never fail." God then formally established a covenant. Genesis 9 details this sacred pact. Never again will all living flesh be swept away by the furious waters of a flood to destroy the earth. As a holy sign, God placed a shining rainbow in the clouds, a visual symbol of divine grace for every future generation to see. This ancient Noahic covenant brought new responsibilities. First, a command to fill the earth again, and second, the permission to eat meat. But with one vital warning: never eat meat with its life force, its blood. Genesis 9 verse 4. Finally, the first law on murder: whoever sheds human blood by human hands, shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God he made man, as Genesis 9 declares. This covenant established divine blessings for all of humanity. The steady seasons, diverse food sources, and the fundamental principles of justice, allowing human civilization to develop in a fractured world. Yet even Noah, a righteous man who walked with God, was vulnerable to moral failure. Scripture tells us Noah became a farmer and planted a vineyard. He drank the wine, got drunk, and lay exposed inside his tent. This dark moment shows how even heroes of faith can stumble. Yet the stark reaction of his sons reveals a deep difference in character. Scripture tells us Ham, father of Canaan, saw his father exposed and whispered the news to his brothers outside. This attitude exposed a deep lack of respect for his father's dignity. In stark contrast, see the reverence of Shem and Japheth. They took a heavy robe, draped it over their shoulders, and walked slowly backward to shield their father. Keeping their faces turned, they refused to look upon him, his exposed state. Their cautious actions demonstrated profound respect, protecting their father even in his deepest hour of shame. When Noah woke and understood what had occurred, his words carried prophetic weight, declaring a curse upon Canaan, making him a servant to his brothers, while declaring, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan serve him." He prayed for God to expand Japheth, letting him live within the tents of Shem. Strangely, the curse fell on Canaan, the son of Ham, perhaps foreshadowing the moral path of his descendants. This prophetic decree was realized generations later when the Canaanites were eventually subdued by the ancient Israelites who descended from Shem. These twin blessings carried profound, lasting implications. The title of God of Shem foreshadowed the vital role his descendants would play in transmitting Holy Scripture. The blessing on Japheth foretold a massive geographical spread traditionally associated with Indo-European nations. This quiet drama set deep patterns that would echo across history, proving that our respect or disrespect toward structural authority will always have lasting consequences. Genesis 10 tracks our dispersion after the flood, a catalog of generations mirroring our own search for identity. Could a dusty list of Noah's descendants actually be a hidden map of the human psyche? We trace our roots to three brothers, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, born into the quiet world right after the Great Flood. Their children became the seeds of nations cataloged in an ancient, forgotten index of humanity. First came the lineage of Japheth spreading north and west toward the cold coastlines of the Mediterranean. They claimed the islands and distant shores, carrying names like Gomer and Javan into the mists of history. They became the early Greeks and Medes. Next came the lineage of Ham. His descendants claimed the hot sands of Africa, building empires in Egypt, Ethiopia, and the promised land of Canaan. But the ancient text stops on one shadow Nimrod, a legendary hunter who forged the first great empires. He built legendary cities like Nineveh and the infamous Babel. Meanwhile, the Canaanites marked out borders that would one day become a bloody sacred battleground. This was holy ground, destined for Israel. Finally, we reach the quiet, sacred lineage of Shem. His line points to Eber, the whisper of the word Hebrew, birthing the great desert tribes of the East. This bloodline carried a promise leading straight to Abraham. Through him, the nation of Israel was born, tying all these scattered families back to one single origin. From this lone family, humanity exploded across the scarred earth, carrying the memory of the great deluge. This ancient catalog reveals a profound truth: we are all cut from the exact same human cloth, born of Adam, bound together. It anchored Israel's identity within the vast sea of global empires. It mapped their relationships with neighbors, redefining their shared, turbulent history. It set the stage for Abraham's quiet call not to conquer, but to heal a fractured world. But while the old scrolls show where we went, the next chapter reveals why we ran. It takes us back to a time when humanity spoke with a single, undivided voice. With one language, there were no limits to what we could build together. A massive wave of travelers migrated east, settling in the fertile plains of Shinar. In this new land, their unity sparked a dangerously brilliant, monumental ambition. They said, "Let us build a towering city that scrapes the very heavens and carve our names into eternity." They built out of sheer dread, terrified of being scattered and forgotten across the empty earth. This tower was more than engineering. It was a psychological coup to seize the throne of God. Their obsession with legacy exposed a deep collective pride and an even deeper existential fear. They refused to spread out directly, defying their creator. But heaven was watching their defiance. With dark, quiet irony, the Almighty had to bend down just to glimpse their towering human achievement. Our greatest monuments are but tiny dust specks when viewed from the heights of ultimate reality. And so the divine looked at this unified, rebellious mass with deep, serious concern. If they are united in this madness, nothing they dream up will be out of their reach. To save us from our own coordinated darkness, a radical intervention had to take place. Their voices were scrambled in an instant, shattering the collective ego that drove their toxic ambition. They were cast out across the empty earth, leaving the grand ruins of their unfinished monument to rot. A sudden wall of silence rose, fragmenting our shared world. The city was named Babel, a lasting symbol of what happens when we try to outgrow God. Yet within this painful exile lay a hidden protective act of deep divine mercy. It stopped a global tyranny of the mind, allowing beautiful, diverse cultures to bloom. They did make a name for themselves, not as gods, but as a warning for generations. With pride shattered, the cosmic lens of Scripture zooms in on one solitary, faithful family. We leave the mass of humanity behind, following a quiet thread of generations through the dust. This path leads from Shem to Terah and finally to a man named Abram. He was the chosen heir to an ancient blessing tasked to heal the fractures of Babel in your own soul today. How do you keep a forgotten God alive in a world of idols? Long ago, Terah led his family away from Ur of the Chaldeans toward Canaan. But they stalled halfway in Haran where Terah died. In this bleak moment, with Abram already 75 years old and settled in Haran, a sudden voice broke through, changing our destiny. Genesis records the haunting call. Go from your country, leave your people and walk away from your father's house to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, bless you, and I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you, and through you all families of the earth will be blessed. This radical call demanded a triple departure, leaving his land, his people, and his father's house. It meant abandoning every single thing that gave him an identity and security in that ancient world. The covenant rested on 3 pillars: a land he had never seen, descendants he did not have, and becoming a great nation. This was a radical promise, since Sarai was barren, meant to bless Abram personally and, through him, reach every family on earth. This final hope shines brightly in the shadow of Babel, right after humanity was scattered. God began a quiet work of healing, not through some grand human monument, but through a quiet divine rescue mission focused on a single man. Abram's response is strikingly quiet. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. Genesis 12, verse 4. There is no inner debate, no hesitation. The ancient text presents his surrender as absolute and incredible act of trust. As Hebrews 11, verse 8 records, by faith Abraham went to a land he would later receive as his inheritance, traveling forward blindly, not knowing where he was actually going. In Canaan, he received another divine promise. The Creator appeared to him and whispered, "To your offspring I will give this soil." According to Genesis 12, verse 7, the mystery destination was finally revealed as Canaan, the very territory occupied by the descendants of Canaan, whom Noah had cursed. Abram's immediate response was to build a sacred stone altar, the first of several he would erect along his journey. These altars were solemn places of worship and physical markers symbolic of his family's future possession of the country. From then on, Abraham's physical wanderings deeply mirrored the silent internal struggles of his faith. Arriving in the territory, he never settled down. Instead, he kept moving through the dry land from Shechem, Bethel, and on toward the Negev. Wherever he went, he built stone altars to mark his path. It reveals his true nature. A holy wanderer, living as a stranger in a land he was promised. But a sudden crisis struck. A terrible famine plagued the region, forcing Abram to flee down to Egypt to survive, as Genesis 12, verse 10 notes. This severe crisis temporarily forced him far out of the land. Afraid for his life, he asked Sarai to pretend to be his sister, a half-truth that hid their marriage. Naturally, her striking beauty caught the eyes of powerful elites, and she was taken straight into Pharaoh's harem. The crisis became catastrophic, threatening the mother of the promised lineage. Yet God intervened. The Lord struck the royal house with terrible diseases targeting Pharaoh and his family, as Genesis 12, verse 17 records. After this narrow escape, Abraham returned to the dry hills only to face a new feud. The scarce land triggered fighting between his shepherds and Lot's men. Showing great trust, Abraham let Lot choose his own land first. Lot chose the lush valley of the Jordan near Sodom. Once they parted, God spoke to Abraham again, saying, "Look up from where you stand to the north, south, east, and west. Every span of land you see I give to you and your offspring forever," says Genesis 13, verses 14 and 15. The divine pledge now had clear physical boundaries. Soon Abraham was swept into a brutal war when eastern kings raided the cities of the valley. He mobilized his small army, rescued Lot, and brought back the stolen goods. This victory introduced Melchizedek, the mysterious priest-king of Salem, who blessed him and received a tenth of the spoils. After this, God sealed his sacred covenant through a dark ancient ritual, with split animal carcasses and a burning torch that glided between the pieces. Genesis 15 verse 18 records, "On that day the Lord made a covenant, saying to your lineage, I give this territory, from the river of Egypt all the way to the great Euphrates." This eerie ceremony sealed the promise forever, an unconditional oath with God alone, taking on the entire burden. These repeating divine promises forged Abraham's deep faith, preparing him to fulfill the covenant. As a wandering exile on soil promised only to his unborn heirs, Abraham's domestic life became a quiet war. It exposed his profound belief alongside his deepest human flaws. The ultimate hurdle, an impossible promise that defied nature. How could he father a vast lineage when Sarai, his wife, remained barren? This is Genesis, chapter 16, verse 1. After 10 barren years in Canaan, Sarai suggested a desperate, culturally accepted escape. She said, "The Lord has closed my womb. Sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Genesis 16, verse 2. Abraham yielded, and Hagar, their Egyptian servant, conceived a child. The fallout was instant and bitter. Knowing she carried the heir, Hagar looked upon her mistress with quiet contempt, as recorded in Genesis 16, verse 4. The bond between these two women shattered, prompting Sarai to inflict such harsh and bitter abuse that Hagar fled into the unforgiving desert. There, a divine messenger met her and urged her to return and endure, promising, "I will multiply your offspring beyond all ability to count." This is Genesis 16, verse 10. Hagar returned and bore Ishmael when Abraham was 86. Then 13 years passed. God confronted Abraham once more, binding him to the eternal covenant and demanding profound shifts. First, their names changed. Abram, the exalted leader, became Abraham, father of nations, and Sarai became Sarah, both names carrying the heavy promise. Second circumcision was demanded, a permanent, painful seal carved into the flesh as a sign of their oath, binding every male in his house. Third, and most shocking of all, God declared that aged Sarah would give birth within a year. Faced with this biological impossibility, Abraham's mind fractured with silent disbelief. He fell flat on his face, laughing in the dark, asking himself, can a man who is 100 father a child? Can Sarah at 90 give birth? Genesis 17, verse 17. He pleaded for Ishmael to be the chosen heir, but God stood absolutely firm, declaring, "Your wife Sarah will bear a son, and you will name him Isaac. With him I will seal an everlasting covenant for all generations to come." Thus says the book of Genesis 17, verse 19. Soon after, 3 shadowy figures visited Abraham, and one revealed himself to be the Lord, repeating the vow. Overhearing from the tent door, Sarah also laughed in mocking doubt, but her fear was met with a quiet question. Is anything too hard for God? Genesis 18, verse 14. She conceived, bearing Isaac when Abraham was 100 and she was 90. The name Isaac, meaning he laughs, marked a profound change, turning bitter skepticism into blinding joy. Sarah cried, "God has given me laughter, and everyone will join in." Genesis 21, verse 6. Yet the miracle child sparked deep psychological warfare. At Isaac's great feast, Sarah saw Ishmael jeering at him, provoking her desperate demand. "Banish this slave woman and her boy, for he will never share the inheritance with my son Isaac." Genesis 21, verse 10. Though it tore at Abraham's soul, God approved, promising that he would also build Ishmael into a powerful nation. Then came the absolute terrifying test of Abraham's faith, demanding the unthinkable. Take your precious boy, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and journey to the land of Moriah. Sacrifice him on the mountain I will point out to you. Genesis 22, verse 2. Without a word, Abraham obeyed. He bound his son, raised the knife, and was stopped only at the final second by a heavenly voice. This horrific moment proved Abraham's complete surrender and exposed God's absolute rejection of human sacrifice. Instead, a ram was provided, signaling a sacrificial substitution that would soon become the core of ancient theology. This final, agonizing trial sealed their covenant forever. The Lord declared, by my own name I have sworn, because you did not hold back. I will bless you, and your lineage will carry hope to all nations. Genesis 22, verses 16 to 18. Following Sarah's death, Abraham sought a wife for Isaac from his own relatives in Haran, refusing the local Canaanites. Guided by unseen hands, his servant discovered Rebekah at a well, knowing she was the one. Genesis 24, verse 67 captures the quiet start of their union. Isaac led her into his late mother's tent. She became his wife, and in her he found deep comfort. Yet, like Sarah, Rebekah was barren. Genesis 25, verse 21 records how Isaac begged the Lord for her, and his cry was answered. Rebekah conceived, but this hard-won victory brought immediate, agonizing conflict. 2 children fought violently inside her womb. Genesis 25, verse 22. Desperate for answers, she sought the Lord, and heard this: 2 warring nations are inside you. 2 rival peoples divided from birth. Why must we fight our own reflection, Scripture whispers. The older shall serve the younger. A division born in the womb. Esau, the firstborn, emerged wild red and covered in hair, like a rough garment. Then came Jacob, clutching Esau's heel, an early grab for power. These physical traits mirrored their souls. Esau grew into a wild hunter, a man of the dirt, while Jacob lived quietly in the tents. A psychological rift deepened by parental favoritism. Isaac craved the meat of the wild hunter, but Rebekah favored Jacob, the quiet schemer. This divided home bred deep resentment, leading to their first bitter psychological clash. Esau stumbled home from the hunt, starving. Seizing his brother's moment of extreme vulnerability, Jacob pounced. "Sell me your birthright first," Jacob demanded, exploiting Esau's desperate hunger. Esau traded his sacred future for instant comfort, crying, "I am dying. What good is it to me?" This reckless trade proved Esau despised his sacred birthright for instant gratification. Years later, an old blind father prepared to bless his favorite. But Rebekah was listening closely. To fulfill the ancient prophecy, she orchestrated a dark deception, dressing Jacob in his brother's clothes. She prepared the meat, sending Jacob into the shadows to lie and steal the legacy. The trick worked. Isaac unknowingly blessed the impostor. "Let nations bow to you. Let peoples serve you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed," Scripture says. But when Esau realized his identity had been stolen, he let out an agonizing, bitter cry. "Bless me too, my father," he wept. Isaac trembled, knowing the spoken blessing was absolute and permanent. He offered only a secondary promise, foreseeing a hard life of struggle under his brother's yoke. A murderous hatred took root. Esau vowed to kill him. Sensing the danger, Rebekah had to act. She urged Jacob to flee to her brother Laban in Haran, disguised as a search for a wife. And so the chosen heir left as a terrified fugitive, abandoning the warmth of home. He walked into exile and an uncertain future. Yet this story shows divine purpose weaving through human flaws. Betrayal, favoritism, and lies are never justified, yet they are turned into a greater path. Everything was foretold before their birth. Now Jacob's deep journey of spiritual transformation begins. At Bethel, deep in the silent wilderness, his physical exile collided with a spiritual awakening. Sleeping on stone, he envisioned a massive ladder touching the heavens with God's angels ascending and descending upon it. Above it stood the Lord, reaffirming the ancient covenant. I am the Lord God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. This very ground where you sleep I will give to you and your descendants. Waking in absolute awe, Jacob realized the power of the place. Surely, the Lord is here, and I did not know it, Genesis says. He set up a stone pillar to mark the threshold. He made a cautious bargain for protection, showing a young, fragile faith that had not yet learned trust. Reaching Haran, he met Rachel, Laban's beautiful daughter. Love struck him instantly, shifting his path forever. He agreed to work 7 years for her hand, a long time that felt like mere days because of his love. But on the wedding night, Laban secretly swapped Rachel for her older sister, Leah. Morning brought a shocking betrayal. Laban sneered, "It is not our custom to give the younger before the firstborn." A biting irony given how Jacob had cheated his own older brother. Jacob submitted, working 7 more years to marry Rachel, trapped in the very deception he once played. He wedded both sisters, fathering 11 sons and a daughter during his 20 long years of exile in Haran. These children would become the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel, cementing a divine legacy. After 20 long years, Jacob resolved to return home, though Laban desperately tried to prevent it. But Jacob had grown wealthy. He fled in secret, escaping the uncle who had exploited his labor. When Laban pursued him, they forged a tense peace treaty, piling stones called Gilead, a heap of witness. Yet his greatest fear lay ahead. A final face-off with Esau, who had sworn his death 20 years ago. We too face our past. When messengers warned that Esau was coming with 400 men, terror gripped Jacob. He split his followers into 2 camps for safety, sent rich gifts to soothe his brother, and then spent a haunting night wrestling a dark stranger. The book of Genesis records this life-changing struggle. Alone in the dark, Jacob fought a silent traveler until dawn. The stranger finally asked, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. Then the figure declared, "Your name is no longer Jacob, but Israel, for you have fought with God and with men and survived." This new name marked a deep shift from Jacob the deceiver to Israel, the one who wrestles with God. The old deceiver who stole his birthright through deep cunning now won a true blessing through honest, painful struggle. Limping from a hip, wounded during that fierce cosmic match, Jacob met his brother, no longer relying on clever schemes, but standing as a man who saw God face to face. Shockingly, their reunion was defined by peace instead of blood. Esau ran to him, held him close, and threw his arms around his neck, kissing him as they both wept. After this deeply emotional reunion, the brothers parted ways. Esau went back to Sah, while Jacob settled down, first in Sakov, then Shem. Jacob's life in Canaan brought even deeper trials, the violation of his daughter Dinah and his son's excessive vengeance against Shem, his beloved Rachel dying while giving birth to Benjamin, and Reuben's disgraceful betrayal with Bilhah. Yet he also found powerful moments of true spiritual renewal, like returning to Bethel, where God confirmed his new name and sacred promises. Among Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph held a unique status. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other son because he was the child of his old age, making him a robe of many colors. This obvious favoritism, paired with Joseph's prophetic dreams, ruling over the family, deepened his brothers' dark hatred. They could not say a single kind word to him. As scripture reveals, this hatred peaked when Joseph, sent by his father to check on his brothers, tending flocks far from home, was ambushed. "Here comes the dreamer," they sneered. "Come, let us murder him now and dump him into one." these deep cisterns. Reuben tried to save Joseph's life, proposing that they only throw him into the deep pit alive, secretly planning to rescue him later. But before he could, Judah suggested an alternative, selling Joseph to passing Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph was sold and taken to Egypt. To cover their dark crime, the brothers dipped Joseph's beautiful robe in goat's blood and presented it to Jacob, leaving him to conclude his beloved son was slain by a wild beast. Deep in Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh where he initially thrived. The Lord was with Joseph, making him highly successful. His master recognized that the Lord was beside him, granting clear success in all his duties, as Genesis 39, verses 2-3. This success led Potiphar to make Joseph the head of his entire household, yet his fortunes took a sharp turn when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. He refused her advances, demanding how he could do such a wicked thing and sin against God, as Genesis 39 records. Spurned, she lied, accusing him of rape, which meant his imprisonment. Yet even behind bars, the Lord stayed with Joseph, showing him deep mercy and granting him favor with the prison warden, as noted in Genesis 39:21, placing him over all other captives. Soon, Joseph interpreted the dreams of two royal officials, the chief cupbearer and the baker. When his prophetic readings proved true, the cupbearer was restored and the baker executed. Joseph pleaded with the cupbearer to mention him to Pharaoh, but the chief cupbearer forgot all about Joseph, as Genesis 40:23 shows. 2 years passed before Pharaoh had terrifying dreams that none of his magicians could solve. The cupbearer finally remembered Joseph, who was quickly freed from prison. Joseph told Pharaoh, "I cannot do it, but God will grant Pharaoh the peace he seeks," as written in Genesis 41:16. He explained that the dreams predicted 7 years of great abundance, followed by 7 years of harsh famine, advising Pharaoh to find a wise leader to gather and store grain during the years of plenty. Deeply moved by Joseph's profound wisdom, Pharaoh gave him this exact authority, saying, "I set you over all the land of Egypt." Genesis 41:41. At 30 years old, the captive Joseph was suddenly made prime minister of the land, receiving Pharaoh's own signet ring, fine garments, a gold necklace, a royal chariot, and the Egyptian name Zapan Paneah. He was also given an aristocratic wife as Enoch, who bore him 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Just as Joseph had foretold, the 7 years of rich harvests ended, replaced by a severe famine reaching far beyond Egypt's borders, as hunger struck Canaan. Jacob sent 10 of his sons to Egypt for grain, keeping only Benjamin, Rachel's other son, safe at home. What happens when you cannot recognize your own brother in Egypt? Joseph appeared entirely Egyptian, yet he knew them instantly. Keeping his identity secret, he tested his brothers, calling them spies and demanding they bring Benjamin to prove their innocence. He held Simeon hostage, then secretly slipped back their money into their grain sacks. As the starvation war on Jacob finally let Benjamin make the journey, sending him to Egypt under Judah's vow of protection. This marked their second descent into the empire. Joseph welcomed them with a feast, fighting back tears at the sight of Benjamin. For his final trial, he ordered his silver cup planted in Benjamin's sack, sending soldiers to stage a search. When Benjamin was caught, Judah stepped forward, begging to take the boy's place as a slave. He knew losing Rachel's remaining son would break their old father's heart. This profound sacrifice revealed a deep psychological shift within brothers, especially in Judah, the very man who once sold Joseph. Witnessing this redemption, the ruler of Egypt finally revealed himself. "I am Joseph, the brother you sold into Egypt," he cried. Genesis chapter 45, verse 4. Meeting their terror with grace, he reframed their entire dark history. Do not grieve over your betrayal, for God sent me ahead of you to save lives. Genesis 45, verse 5. Joseph urged his family to move to Egypt, promising protection through the 5 remaining years of drought. Blessed by Pharaoh, Jacob and his 70 kin traveled down to settle in the lush land of Goshen. The reunion of father and son was deeply emotional. Israel whispered, "Now I am ready to die since I have looked upon your face." Genesis 46, verse 30. Jacob lived 17 more years in Egypt. Before his death, he blessed his sons, elevating Joseph's boys into full tribes of Israel. The old patriarch demanded one final promise: "Bury me not in Egypt, but in the ancestral cave of Machpelah in Canaan." This grand, solemn funeral procession proved that even in the height of worldly success, Egypt was not home. Their destiny remained in Canaan. Decades later, as Joseph faced his own death, he echoed that deep, enduring truth. "I am dying, but God will surely lead you out of this land to the country promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Genesis 50, verse 24. He then made his family swear to carry his bones back home. It was a staggering act of faith, destined to be fulfilled centuries later during the Exodus. The family of Israel now stood exiled from the soil of Israel, but their psychological anchor held fast to the ancient promise of return, believing it would one day be realized. Down in Egypt, the descendants of Jacob grew into a vast, thriving force. Exodus chapter 1, verse 7 notes, "They multiplied and filled the earth. They grew too large to ignore, fulfilling the covenant to make Abraham a mighty nation." But with prosperity came a dark human reaction. Exodus chapter 1, verse 8 marks the terrifying shift. A new king arose who knew nothing of Joseph's legacy. This Pharaoh saw not allies, but a rising, nameless threat inside his borders. His answer was systematic, calculated cruelty. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11 reveals how they appointed ruthless taskmasters to crush their spirit, forcing them to build empire supply cities. Yet the plan failed. The more they were crushed, the more they spread. Exodus chapter 1, verse 12. Pharaoh resorted to terror, ordering Hebrew midwives to quietly murder every newborn boy. But they refused him. So Pharaoh issued a dark decree: throw every newborn boy into the Nile. Exodus chapter 1, verse 22. Amidst this state-sponsored terror, Moses was born. Exodus chapter 2, verse 2. His mother hid him for 3 months, shielding his life until she could keep him secret no longer. She took a basket of papyrus, coated it with pitch, and placed the baby among the reeds of the Nile. Exodus chapter 2, verse 3. In a twist of fate, Pharaoh's own daughter discovered the floating basket, choosing to spare the infant. His sister Miriam stepped out and offered a Hebrew nurse his very own mother. Paid to raise her own child, she watched him enter the royal household. The princess named him Moses, meaning drawn from the water. Exodus chapter 2, verse 10. He grew up with elite privilege, receiving an Egyptian education while secretly clinging to his Hebrew roots. At 40, his inner conflict shattered him. He killed an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. When discovered, he fled, much like we flee ourselves. Why do we run to the wilderness? He fled to Midian, married Jethro's daughter Zipporah, and spent 40 quiet years shepherding, a slow training ground to lead Israel. After 40 years in the barren desert, Moses' daily life had settled into an unbending routine until a shocking encounter recorded in Exodus 3, verse 2. The messenger of the Lord appeared in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared, seeing that the shrub was burning fiercely, yet it was not consumed. As Moses stepped closer, God called his name and demanded deep respect. Do not approach any closer. Remove your sandals, for the ground you stand upon is holy. Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. The voice was clear. I have witnessed the misery of my people, and I am descending to rescue them, as Exodus chapter 3, verses 7 and 8 recounts. Then came the command, go to Pharaoh and lead my people out. Exodus chapter 3, verse 10. Terrified, Moses objected. But when he demanded to know God's true name, the vast reply came, I am who I am. Tell the children of Israel that the great I am sent you. According to Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, this reveals absolute self-existence and eternal constancy. Yet despite this cosmic revelation, Moses resisted until God gave him his brother Aaron as a spokesperson. Back in Egypt, Moses and Aaron met the elders, showed them the miraculous signs, and proclaimed the promise of freedom. The weary people believed, but their very first clash with Pharaoh brought a brutal backlash. To the command, let my people go, from Exodus chapter 5, verse 1, Pharaoh sneered, who is this Lord that I should obey him? I do not know your Lord, and I will not free Israel. Following Exodus chapter 5, verse 2, he doubled their workloads, forcing them to make bricks without any straw. Under this crushing burden, the suffering Hebrews turned bitterly against Moses, who cried out to God in deep despair. He was beginning to realize that salvation is never easy, and that the oppressed would doubt their own rescue. God answered his agony with a promise, now you will witness what I do to Pharaoh. A mighty hand will force him to release them, as written in Exodus chapter 6, verse 1. The stage was set for a terrifying clash of power. The first disaster struck because Pharaoh still refused to free the captives. Moses raised his staff, struck the waters of the sacred Nile, and Exodus chapter 7, verses 20 and 21 records that the river turned to blood. The fish died, the water stank. This strike targeted the sacred Nile, worshipped by Egypt as a life-giving god. When Pharaoh refused to yield a second, horror came. Frogs swarmed out of the river, choking the land. This directly challenged Heket, the Egyptian goddess of fertility. Pharaoh begged for mercy, promising to release the slaves, but broke his word once the torment stopped. The third plague of crawling lice swarmed over humans and beasts without warning. The royal sorcerers who had easily replicated the miracles now failed completely, whispering, "This is the finger of God." Exodus chapter 8, verse 19. The fourth judgment of biting flies brought a clear divide. I will distinguish between my people and yours, says Exodus chapter 8, verse 23. From then on, Goshen remained safe. The fifth torment was a fatal disease that wiped out Egyptian cattle, striking the very animal gods they worshipped. The sixth horror unleashed. Painful boils bursting into open sores on both humans and animals. According to Exodus 9:10, the seventh brought icy hail mixed with roaring fire. Warnings went out to shelter everyone, and some Egyptians actually feared the Lord and hid indoors. Others dismissed the warning and paid with their lives. Then came the eighth plague, ravenous locusts stripping the land bare, forcing even Pharaoh's own advisors to plead for the Israelites' release. The ninth blow cast a suffocating darkness for 3 days. Yet the children of Israel had light. Exodus chapter 10, verse 23. This humiliated Ra, the sun god. But as Pharaoh still refused full release, the final devastating plague arrived, the death of every firstborn. This ultimate blow was a judgment on all the gods of Egypt, from Exodus 12:12. Survival required a sacrifice, introducing the Passover lamb for every home. its blood painted on the doorposts, its meat eaten with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. This blood was crucial. Seeing the blood, I will pass over you. Exodus 12:13. At midnight, death came as predicted. A terrible wail rose across Egypt, for there was not a single household without someone dead. Exodus 12:30. Finally broken, Pharaoh commanded, "Get up, leave my people," according to Exodus 12:31. These 10 plagues proved that the God of Israel ruled over all the local Egyptian deities, dominating the very forces of nature they worshipped. Trembling and in a rush, the Israelites fled Egypt just as instructed. They asked for gold, silver, and clothes, leaving Egypt plundered. As Exodus 12:36 reveals, this is our own journey. What if their stolen plunder was compensation for centuries of pain? A massive crowd walked into the unknown. Around 600,000 men walked, plus women and children, as Exodus chapter 12 reveals. Over 2 million souls journeyed. From their first step, the Creator guided them, leading the way. He went ahead, as a cloud by day and fire by night, an ancient shield of divine presence. This presence gave them constant direction. Yet strangely, the Creator did not lead them down the shortest path. Instead, he took a route that trapped them between the deep sea and the ruthless Egyptian army. Soon after they fled, Pharaoh sent his troops. Watching the enemy approach, raw panic rose. They cried out, "Were there no graves in Egypt, that you brought us here to die in the desert?" But Moses stood firm in faith, saying, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and witness your salvation today. The Creator will fight for you." What happened next is one of the most stunning miracles ever recorded. As Moses raised his hand over the water, a violent east wind began to push the sea back all night. The raging waters parted, turning the muddy seabed into dry ground, carving a safe path for the escaping Israelites. They marched straight through the divided sea, with towering walls of water on their right and on their left. The Egyptians charged into the dry gap, but the divine threw their entire army into absolute chaos. As soon as Israel crossed, the waters collapsed, swallowing Pharaoh's chariots and horses in a single sweep. This swift triumph proved his supreme power, and the people witnessed this raw majesty. They saw the great strike against Egypt, inspiring deep reverence and a newfound belief in their protector. Moses led them in a passionate song of victory, while Miriam rallied the women with dance and tambourines. This miracle defined their identity, forever etched deeply into their collective memory. It stood as the ultimate proof of redemption. But the joy of victory quickly faced harsh reality. Life in the wilderness was brutal. Just 3 days after their triumph, they hit their first major crisis. At Marah, the water was too bitter to drink. Desperate and angry, the crowd turned against Moses. He cried out for help. Guided to throw wood into the pool, Moses made the water fresh. This began a pattern of panic relief and deeper lessons. Next, they found 12 springs at Elim, a sanctuary under 70 palm trees. But this oasis was temporary, and hunger soon sparked fresh panic. With food gone, they complained again. The Creator answered, "At twilight you will eat and be filled." In the morning, bread would fall. That evening, massive flocks of quail covered their camp. By morning, a strange substance appeared, like fine white frost, dusting the desert floor. They called it manna. They had to gather only what they needed each day, testing their trust. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much, preparing for the sacred day of rest. For 40 long years, this mystery sustained them until they finally reached a settled country. At Rephidim, thirst struck again. Moses struck a solid rock with his staff, and pure water gushed out. As the water flowed, danger emerged. The fierce Amalekites launched a surprise attack on their camp. With Joshua leading the fight, Moses held his hands high. When his strength failed, his allies stepped in. Aaron and Hur supported his heavy arms until sunset, securing a hard-fought victory over their enemies. It proved that human struggle needs divine support. Before they hit Sinai, Moses' father-in-law arrived. Jethro offered vital wisdom, seeing Moses exhausted by trying to settle every single dispute alone. He advised delegating power to trusted judges. Moses listened, establishing a new order of leadership. This structure brought order to their wandering. 3 months after escaping the iron grip of Egypt, they reached the rugged wilderness of Sinai, pitching their tents in the shadow of the mountain. Moses climbed up toward the heavens, and a voice called out from the peaks, "Speak to the descendants of Jacob. Tell them you saw my work in Egypt, how I carried you on eagle's wings to bring you here." This setup paved the way for a sacred promise offered not for their perfection, but through grace. It was a gift of pure love, forged in the fires of their miraculous rescue. Then came the offer. If you listen closely to my voice and keep my promise, you will be my most treasured possession. What if we were meant to be a kingdom of priests, as Exodus 19 promises? This offered a special, sacred relationship with a dual purpose to be a treasured, exclusive possession and a spiritual bridge to the world. This pact did not erase the older promise to Abraham, but built a bridge toward its final fulfillment. Shivering in the dust, the people agreed, "We will do everything spoken." This quick vow, though sincere, would face terrifying tests in the dark wilderness of human nature. With the initial promise made, they had to prepare to meet the raw, unshielded presence of the divine. Moses ordered a 2-day purification, demanding they wash their garments and restrain their primal desires. They drew lines in the dirt. "Do not climb the mountain, or even touch its edge," Exodus 19 warns. "Touch it and die." It separated human fear from absolute holiness. On the 3rd morning, the sky broke. The divine presence arrived in a display of pure terror, as Exodus 19 describes. Thunder crashed, lightning tore the sky, and a dense black cloud swallowed the summit. A deafening horn blew. Mount Sinai was buried under thick smoke because the Lord descended in blinding fire. Plumes billowed like a great kiln, and the whole mountain shook violently beneath their trembling feet. The horn wailed louder and louder. This raw manifestation of the sacred conveyed both majestic beauty and deep terror. The people backed away, trembling. Confronted by this power, they realized the vast distance between their small lives and the divine. From the smoke, God spoke the 10 Commandments, the psychological bedrock of human identity. These ancient laws, recorded in Exodus and Deuteronomy, are not arbitrary rules, but a map for the soul. They define our place in the universe. This sacred list starts not with a demand, but with history. "I am the Lord your God who rescued you from Egypt, from the house of slavery," Exodus 20 tells us. This beginning reminds us that the rules are a response to a God who has already set us free. Our obedience is meant to rise from deep, quiet gratitude, not just a shivering fear of punishment. The law splits into 2 paths. The first 4 align our spirit with God, while the rest protect human relationships. The very first rule demands total devotion. "You shall have no other gods before me," Exodus 23 declares. In a world of endless idols demanding single worship, even without denying other spirits, was a revolutionary concept. Slowly, this exclusivity grew into complete monotheism, the realization that other gods simply do not exist. The second law forbids physical idols. "You shall not make a carved image," Exodus 20 warns. This boundary set them completely apart from neighboring cultures, where stone statues and divine images were central. It prevented them from cheapening the infinite or trying to control the divine with magic. The 3rd commandment protects the divine name. "You shall not misuse the name of the Lord," Exodus 27 warns. This goes far beyond taking false oaths. It demands deep respect for the divine character since a name represents a being's true essence. The fourth law commands us to rest. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, Exodus 28 demands. This weekly rest mirrored the rhythm of creation. It reminded them of their escape from slavery, providing vital rest for a weary modern soul. The fifth commandment turns inward, safeguarding our family structure. Honor your father and your mother, Exodus 20:12 urges. It is the only rule carrying a promise that your days may be long. This duty built a lasting social order. Honoring ancestral wisdom was crucial to passing down sacred truth. The sixth commandment guards the precious gift of human life with a simple warning. You shall not murder. Exodus 20:13 commands. This ban honors the divine spark in everyone. While it did not outlaw self-defense or justice, it established the ultimate sanctity of human life. The seventh commandment protects the sacred union of marriage, declaring, "You shall not commit adultery." This rule guarded the home, preserving the very bedrock of our communities. Its high place in these 10 rules reveals how vital healthy families are to our survival. The eighth commandment protects what we build with our hands. You shall not steal. Exodus 20:15 defends private property. But does this ancient decree actually map our deepest psychological boundaries? This anchors respect. Next, the ninth commandment shields objective truth, declaring, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor," in Exodus 20:16. Behind this dry legal text lies a deeper human truth. It demands radical honesty. Without truth, our shared psychological trust collapses and societal justice crumbles. The 10th commandment targets our shadows, forbidding us to covet in Exodus 20:17. Going beyond actions, that law exposes our hidden motives, realizing that disordered desires are the true root of all behavioral violations. It teaches that true righteousness requires inner purity, a concept utterly unique in the ancient world. These laws stood apart for their elegant simplicity and focus on the soul, crafting a timeless moral compass that would expand into hundreds of specific rules, later distilled by Jesus into the dual command of supreme love for God and neighbor. After this grand revelation, Moses received additional laws to apply these core principles to specific situations. This broader blueprint, spanning from Exodus 20:22 23:33, is the Book of the Covenant. It governs civil, criminal, and ritual paths. These civil laws regulated daily labor with rare human protections, assigning liability for damages, debts, and loans. They shielded immigrants, widows, and orphans, showing a radical compassion that shattered the brutal norms of history. As Exodus 22 demands, if you take a neighbor's cloak as a pledge, return it before sunset. It is their only blanket. What else will they sleep in? If they cry, I will listen, for I am compassionate. Meanwhile, the criminal laws established punishments for various offenses, firmly anchoring justice in the principle of proportional retribution, an eye for an eye, in Exodus 21. Far from promoting vengeance, this actually limited excessive retaliation, ensuring punishment fit the crime. Meanwhile, ceremonial laws covered sacred worship seasons and tithes. They outlawed the dark pagan practices of neighboring tribes and set 3 great yearly feasts to draw people before the divine. After receiving these laws, Moses led a solemn ceremony to seal this sacred pact. As Exodus 24 describes, Moses wrote down the Lord's words and, rising at dawn, built an altar at the mountain's base with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the crowd, saying, "Behold, the blood of the covenant, which the Lord has made with you." This intense ancient ritual followed the classic pattern of treaties in the ancient Near East, rich with psychological weight. The written record bound them to clear terms, the altar and pillars representing both sides. Sacrifices symbolized their commitment unto death, and blood sprinkled on both people and altar forged a deep spiritual bond. The blood of the covenant highlighted the sheer weight of this mutual vow. Once sealed, a mystical covenant meal took place. Exodus 24 recounts how Moses, Aaron, his sons, and 70 elders of Israel ascended the peak, seeing the God of Israel. Beneath his feet lay a pavement like glowing sapphire stone as clear as the sky itself. They gazed upon God, yet they ate and drank. This shared feast symbolized profound peace, visually confirming their restored bond. After this mystical communion on the heights, Moses was called to ascend even higher, to receive additional divine instructions. Exodus 24 explains, "Lord said to Moses, 'Come up to me on the mountain, and wait here, and I will give you stone tablets of the law and commandments I wrote for their instruction.'" Accompanied by Joshua, part of the way Moses entered the cloud covering the peak, staying there for 40 days and 40 nights. During this time, Moses received detailed plans for the tabernacle, the portable center of worship where God would live among his people. This profound Sinai revelation was crucial in establishing appropriate standards for worship in the wild. But Moses' prolonged absence sparked severe anxiety. Exodus 32 records that when the people saw Moses delayed on the mountain, they crowded around Aaron and said to him, "Get up, make us gods to lead us. As for this Moses, the man who led us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." This frantic panic revealed how superficially they understood the first and second commandments received only weeks before. Their desperate demand for visible gods showed an attachment to Egyptian patterns, showing our timeless fear of abandonment. Surprisingly, we are just like them. Aaron yielded without a fight, demanding they tear off their gold earrings. He took their precious, fragile safety nets, shaping the metal into a molded calf. This ancient idol was not a foreign god, but a safe, manageable version of the divine, a god they could control. Aaron cried out, "Here is what rescued you from your fears of the unknown." This made their betrayal far more subtle. It was not a flat rejection of God, but an attempt to domesticate the infinite through familiar, comfortable images. They defaulted to their old Egyptian chains like the sacred Apis bull. Aaron even tried to sanitize the compromise, declaring, "Tomorrow we feast to the Lord." But the heavens saw. God's response to this self-deception was immediate and severe, warning Moses, "Your people, whom you led out of bondage, have corrupted their own minds. They have cast a cold metal calf and worshipped their own creation." God pointedly called them Moses' people, not his, showing a rupture in the psychological covenant. The divine proposed to wipe them out and start fresh, testing the hidden depths of Moses' own soul. Moses alone was offered a new empire. "Leave me so my hot anger may consume them," God challenged, "and I will build you into a mighty nation." This offer tested Moses' ego, offering him a status matching Abraham. Yet Moses chose collective healing over personal glory, arguing on 3 levels. He appealed to God's reputation among empires, the cynics of Egypt, and the sacred promises sworn to their ancestors. His prayer bridged the gap. Then the Lord relented, sparing them from total ruin. But as Moses stepped back down the mountain into the raw reality of the camp and saw the frantic dancing around the idol, his anger flared. He smashed the stone law, a bitter mirror showing they had shattered their inner vows. He ground their golden god to dust, threw it in water, and made them drink their own illusion, proving its ultimate emptiness. Confronted with his failure, Aaron offered a fragile excuse, claiming the idol practically made itself. "I threw gold into the fire and outwalked this calf. His denial of shadow stood in stark contrast to Moses' decisive confrontation. A hard choice followed when Moses cried to the camp, "Whoever stands for the Lord, step forward." The sons of Levi answered, executing 3,000 rebels who clung to the illusion, carving a hard boundary into the psyche. The lesson was clear: holding on to old addictions always brings grave death to the soul. Moses then returned to the mountain, offering his own life. "This people has committed a desperate sin," he cried, "but please forgive them. If not, erase me from the book of life." God refused the exchange, establishing individual responsibility. Yet he agreed to guide them on the journey, though scars remained. This crisis taught an eternal truth: how easily we revert to old habits when anxiety strikes, and the danger of wrapping our hopes in physical substitutes. To heal, they needed a sacred center. After this psychological collapse, God renewed the covenant, revealing blueprints for the tabernacle and nomadic sanctuary, designed to rebuild their fragmented identity. It was to be a place where the divine could live inside their wandering hearts. The ancient text reveals its true purpose: "Build me a holy sanctuary so that I can dwell deep within them." This design mapped the human mind, featuring an outer courtyard leading to a hidden tent divided into two sacred spaces: the holy place and the deep, silent, most holy place. Hidden inside the core lay the Ark of the Covenant, holding the absolute moral law, a jar of manna and Aaron's blooming staff. Above it rested the mercy seat, where the blood of reconciliation was offered. The outer chamber held three symbols: the incense altar of rising aspirations, rising prayers, the table of bread representing deep divine fellowship, and the seven-branched lampstand of inner light. The open yard outside held the bronze wash basin for cleaning and the altar of sacrifice. This entire architecture of the soul used rich gold, silver, bronze, and fine fabrics organized in a fading scale of value as you walked from the center, mapping the careful steps to the divine. These treasures had to be gathered solely from willing human hearts. Moses was instructed to accept gifts from anyone whose spirit was moved to give freely. The response of the community was overwhelming. Everyone whose inner spirit was stirred stepped forward, offering their most precious belongings to build this sacred sanctuary. What drives such boundless giving? They were so generous they had to be ordered to stop bringing construction materials. God appointed specific craftsmen, declaring, "See, I have called Bezalel by name," filling him with the divine spirit, granting him deep wisdom, understanding, and master skill in every craft. Exodus 31:23. This first mention of divine filling reveals a psychological truth: our human craft and creativity are deeply spiritual. Our work is not just labor but worship. When this sacred dwelling was completed exactly 1 year after the Exodus, divine glory descended. A thick cloud enveloped their meeting place, and a blinding presence filled the sanctuary, representing our inner home. Exodus 40:34. This outward sign confirmed their deepest psychological need: acceptance. It offered tangible proof of the sacred within them, anchoring their daily lives at the center of existence, for generations long before grand temples were built. More importantly, it established a profound spiritual map that still guides us today: the tension between a distant, transcendent universe and an intimate, internal presence. It exposes our deep-seated guilt, that quiet shadow blocking our path to grace, and the deep human need for restoration. This ancient ritual mirrors our own modern search for identity and healing, a theme culminating in the ultimate mystery: the Word made flesh, dwelling beside us, and the quiet spark of the Spirit living within our own hearts. This ancient Sinai covenant, with its moral laws and structural boundaries, offered a psychological framework for our relationship with the sacred. Yet, like us, they repeatedly broke this bond, struggling with exile and identity. Still, it set eternal standards of devotion, carving a path toward a profound inner transformation. After spending nearly a year camped at the silent base of Mount Sinai, where they faced their fears and built their sanctuary, the travelers had to organize for the trek to the Promised Land. God ordered a precise head count. Numbers chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 records count the entire community by their ancestral clans and families, listing every single man one by one. You and Aaron must register those who are 20 years old or more fit to serve in the military. This census recorded 603,550 men fit for war, excluding women, children, the elderly, and the priests. This registry served both defense and internal order. The Levites dedicated solely to sacred duties were numbered separately. Numbers chapter 3 verse 15 commands, count the Levites by their clans, registering every male over a month old. 22,000 were consecrated to serve as spiritual surrogates for the firstborn. Symbolically, their camp was arranged in a perfect order, with their sanctuary at the very center. Numbers chapter 2 verse 2 describes the tribes must camp around the tent some distance from its sacred borders, each under their own family banner. 3 specific tribes camped on each side of the sanctuary, with Judah to the east, Reuben south, Ephraim west, and Dan north, acting as the main anchors. This layout spoke to a profound psychological reality: the divine must rest at the center of the soul. The structure balanced collective unity with individual identity, and this cross-shaped camp symbolically pointed to how the divine would eventually live within humanity. In this exile, every movement was guided by the supernatural. Numbers chapter 9 verses 17 and 18 explains, whenever the cloud lifted, they marched. Wherever it stopped, they camped. By divine instruction they journeyed, and by that same word they rested. After receiving these precise blueprints, including the crafting of twin silver trumpets to signal their assemblies and guide their steps, the moment to leave their sacred refuge finally arrived. Numbers chapter 10 verses 11 and 12 records, on the 20th day of the second month, the cloud lifted from the sanctuary. The wandering tribes march out from the silent sands of Sinai, traveling through the wilderness until the guiding cloud settled in the wastes of Paran. Their marching order was strictly organized, led by Judah and its allies, followed by the Levites carrying the disassembled sanctuary pieces. This highly structured departure was the start of a journey they hoped would lead directly to their home. Yet it took very little time for bitter grumbling to replace faith. Numbers chapter 11 verse 1 records their deep discontent, showing how their quiet resentment sparked a divine fury, sending a consuming fire to burn the very outer edges of their camp. They named this scorched place Taberah, meaning burning establishing, a tragic psychological pattern of complaint, swift consequence, a desperate plea to their leader, and a prayer that finally brought mercy. Yet peace vanished. Soon a familiar hunger took root. Numbers chapter 11 verse 4 describes how they craved. Soon they grew tired of the miraculous bread. The people wept, longing for the rich meats and fish they left behind. They remembered the melons, the onions, and the garlic of Egypt. Now they said, our souls are dry, seeing nothing but this. They loathed the manna. This bitter rejection of their daily bread exposed a deeper, darker void in the human heart. We often paint our past chains in gold, choosing comfortable bondage over the terrifying freedom of the unknown. This endless crying broke Moses. In his heavy despair, he cried out, "Why have you laid this burden on me? What did I do to deserve this weight I cannot carry? These people alone." And from the silence, the Creator answered, First, by sharing Moses' heavy burden, placing a portion of his spirit onto 70 elders. But second, with a terrifying promise. He promised them so much meat that they would choke on it. You want flesh, you will eat it. Not for one day. You will eat it not for 5, 10, or 20 days, but for a whole month, until it pours from your nose. Then a fierce wind brought a massive cloud of quail, burying the camp 3 feet deep, stretching a day's journey in every direction. But greed has a price. As they gorged themselves while the meat was still in their mouths, a terrible plague struck. Before they could even swallow, anger burned against their restless lust. It is the curse of getting exactly what we blindly crave. They buried their dead in the desert. They called that place Kibroth Hatava, which translates to the graves of craving, a monument to our endless, self-destructive desires. Soon a new poison began to spread from within. This time the betrayal came from Moses' own family. Miriam and Aaron turned on him over his foreign wife. They questioned his marriage, asking, "Has the Creator spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well?" It was a classic human play, hiding bitter envy and prejudice behind a mask of spiritual righteousness. The response was immediate. Called to the sacred tent, the 3 siblings listened as the divine defended his servant. "I speak to him face to face, clearly not in riddles. He beholds my very form. Why were you not afraid?" In an instant, Miriam's skin turned white with leprosy. Only Moses' desperate plea for mercy saved her from permanent exile. She was cast out of the camp for 7 days. These constant rebellions, though different, pointed to the same sickness. An inability to accept grace, a toxic longing for past captivity, and a constant urge to tear down authority. It is the eternal conflict of the soul struggling between divine order and chaotic rebellion. At last, Israel stood at the gateway of their destiny. Just a short march away lay the promised land. But before crossing, they hesitated. 12 spies, one from each tribe, were sent ahead into the dark unknown. "Go scout out the land that I am giving you. Walk its paths and see what awaits you there. Choose your leaders for this journey." For 40 days, these men moved through the shadows of Canaan, studying its secrets. They returned bearing fruits of unbelievable abundance. A single cluster of grapes so massive, it took 2 men to carry it. Their eyes had seen the truth. "It is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey," they reported. "Here is the proof of its richness." But then 10 of those 12 spies allowed fear to paint a different picture. "The people there are giants," they whispered. "The cities are heavily fortified and massive. We are like grasshoppers to them. We cannot face them. They will crush us." Only 2 men, Caleb and Joshua, saw through the eyes of faith. They urged the crowd, "Let us go up now. We can conquer it." But fear is a highly contagious disease. The crowd chose panic over promise. A wave of collective terror swept through the camp. The entire community wept bitterly into the dark night, paralyzed by the phantom giants of their own minds. They turned on their guides, whispering in the shadows, "Let us choose a new captain and go back. Let us return to Egypt." They chose the familiar security of chains over the hard road to destiny. Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes, begging them, "If we are aligned with truth, we will be carried through. Do not rebel. Do not let fear blind you. The giants have no defense if we walk in courage." The mob responded by calling to stone them to death. Suddenly, glory filled the tabernacle. How long will they refuse to trust me? How long will they doubt despite everything I have shown them? I will strike them down and start anew. Only Moses' desperate prayer stood between the people and total erasure. He pleaded for their lives, reminding the heavens of mercy. And so the destructive fire was held back. Yet every choice has its weight. Not one soul from this generation who witnessed my wonders will see the land, but your children, the ones you claimed would perish, will enter. They will inherit the home you were too afraid to claim. Have we misunderstood the wilderness? The decree in Numbers 14 made the sentence clear. Our deepest exile lasts exactly the 40 days we spend exploring our doubts. For every single day we must bear our psychological guilt for 40 years. The cynical spies died instantly in their panic, while the people desperately tried to reverse their own self-sabotage. They marched blindly against their enemies, ignoring every warning. Numbers 14 records the devastating consequence. The Amalekites and Canaanites swept down from the mountains, crushing their false pride and driving them back to Hormah. This crushing defeat sealed the fate of a generation condemned to wander, waiting for their old fears to die. The crisis at Kadesh Barnea was a pivotal mirror for us today. Standing at the threshold of promise, the community chose anxiety over trust, safety over spiritual destiny. The result was a devastating 40-year detour, an entire life cycle lost to the desert of their own disbelief. But then new internal mutinies arose. The years that followed brought deeper threats to spiritual order. Led by Korah, a Levite of high standing, alongside Dathan and Abiram of Reuben. Numbers 16 documents how these men allowed envy to fester, raising a coup against Moses backed by 250 of the nation's most respected leaders. They cornered Moses, crying, "You have gone too far. The whole community is holy, every single one of us, and God is among us. Why do you elevate yourselves over God's people?" This rebellion exposed two distinct psychological drives. Korah coveted the priesthood, while Dathan and Abiram, as Reubenites, deeply resented losing their ancestral birthright to Moses and his civil authority. It was a war of egos. Together they threatened to tear down the sacred structure of truth. So Moses called for a definitive public test. All pretenders had to bring censers with burning incense before the divine presence. Meanwhile, Moses confronted the rebellious Reubenites, who refused his summons, spitting back, "Is it not enough that you dragged us from Egypt, a land of milk and honey, only to kill us in the desert? Must you also dominate us?" Their romanticized memory of Egypt, a brutal slave state, as a land of abundance, reveals how trauma distorts our perception of the past. Then the earth itself ruptured beneath the feet of the conspirators, swallowing them, their households, and all their possessions. For the 250 self-appointed priests, fire flashed from the heavens, instantly consuming those who presumed to offer unholy incense. Astonishingly, by the next morning, the crowd blamed Moses and Aaron, shouting, "You have murdered God's people!" This collective projection unleashed a sudden, devastating plague upon them. To halt the contagion, Aaron ran into the dying crowd with holy incense, stepping into the breach. He stood between the living and the dead, and the plague halted. Still, 14,700 died. To ground Aaron's spiritual authority forever, God ordered a final test. Each tribe brought a dry wooden staff inscribed with their name. The staff of the truly chosen leader would sprout with new life. Overnight, Aaron's dry rod not only budded, but burst with blossoms, shoots, and ripe almonds. This miracle was kept in the Ark of the Covenant as a testament. Yet, even the greatest leaders falter. Near the end of their wanderings, Moses and Aaron faced a crisis of impatience at Meribah. When the crowd panicked for water, God instructed Moses, "Speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will flow." But a bitter Moses snapped at the people, screaming, "Hear now, you rebels! Must we bring water from this rock?" He violently struck the stone twice. Though water poured out generously, God judged the hidden ego behind his actions. "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor my holiness in the sight of the people, you shall not lead this community into the land I have promised them." It was a tragic warning of how easily Pride can derail our highest callings, replacing sacred obedience with self-serving anger. This sudden divine sentence ensured that the conquest of the land would be led by a brand new generation under fresh leadership. As the 40 years drew to a close, they faced one last trial of the ego. The descendants of Esau blockaded their path. Edom declared, "You shall not pass through," and marched out with a formidable army to intimidate them. Forcing them into a long, grueling detour, this rejection tested their patience to its absolute limit. Stripped of options, they turned away. It was during this endless trek that Aaron passed away on Mount Hor. Moses stripped Aaron's sacred garments, showing that we must shed our old identities to let a new lineage begin. Aaron died there, on the mountain peak. This long, grueling detour only deepened the people's heavy despair. Again they raged against God and Moses in Numbers 21:5. In response, God sent venomous serpents. They bit the travelers, and many Israelites died in Numbers 21:6. When they repented, God provided an unusual remedy. Make a fiery serpent and mount it. Anyone bitten who looks at it shall live. Numbers 21:8. This bronze snake, though, later twisted into an idol and destroyed centuries later by King Hezekiah, served as a profound symbol. Jesus would later point to it to foreshadow his own crucifixion. Just as Moses lifted the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted, that everyone who believes in him may have eternal life. John 3:14 and 15. Approaching Canaan from the east, Israel won massive victories over Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, securing their foothold in Transjordan. These conquests terrified Balak, king of Moab, who hired Balaam, a famous seer, to curse Israel. After a bizarre encounter with a speaking donkey, Balaam found it impossible to curse those whom God had blessed, declaring, "I have received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot reverse it." Numbers 23:20. Thwarted in his direct assault, Balaam suggested a deadlier, quieter strategy: spiritual and moral corruption. Numbers 25, verses 1-3, recounts, while Israel stayed in Shittim, the men fell into sexual sin with Moabite women who invited them to worship pagan gods. The people ate the sacrificial meals and bowed down before these idols. So Israel joined in worshiping Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger blazed against them. This crisis threatened them far more than any army. This compromise with pagan gods through sexual immorality brought swift, severe judgment, execution of the leaders, and a plague killing 24,000 Israelites. The plague only stopped when Phinehas, Aaron's grandson, took drastic action against a defiant Israelite and his Midianite partner, who openly mocked the camp's holiness. These harsh wilderness trials served as vital preparation for the conquest of Canaan. Israel learned that enemies would use both military power and cultural seduction, and that victory depended as much on spiritual fidelity as on military tactics. This new generation, forged by their parents' bitter failures, was prepared to enter the land under fresh leadership. As the journey finally ended, God ordered another census on Moab's plains. Numbers 26, verse 2 records, "Take account of the entire Israelite community from 20 years old and upward by their ancestral houses, all who can serve in Israel's army." The total, 601,730, almost mirrored the first census taken nearly 40 years earlier. But Numbers 26, verses 64-65 notes, "None remained from that first census, for the Lord had decreed they would die in the desert. Not a single soul remained except Caleb and Joshua." This identical headcount hit a total generational shift. A new generation had risen to take the place of the old. This second census served many purposes, preparing the army for the coming conquest, foundation for dividing the promised land, and a clear display of divine judgment on that first generation, and divine grace through their survival and growth. During this time, crucial administrative and legal matters were decided. One landmark crisis arose when the daughters of Zelophehad, whose deceased father had died without male heirs, challenged Moses. "Our father died in the desert, leaving no sons. Why should our father's name vanish from his clan just because he had no sons? Grant us land among our father's brothers." This Numbers 27 petition raised a revolutionary question regarding inheritance rights for women. Seeking the Lord, Moses set a legal precedent. The tribe of Joseph's descendants speaks what is right. "This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad. Let them marry whoever they choose, provided they marry within the family of their father's tribe." Numbers 36, 5 and 6. This decree secured both the inheritance rights of daughters and kept ancestral land within the original tribes. Next, another critical issue arose from the request of the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half Manasseh to settle in the Transjordan territory just conquered from Sihon and Og. At first, Moses feared this request mirrored the tragic rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. "Will your brothers go to war while you sit here?" Numbers 32:6. The tribes insisted they had no intention of abandoning their brothers, offering a compromise. "We will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and safe cities for our little ones, but we ourselves will be armed, ready to march before Israel until we brought them to their own land." In Numbers 32, Moses accepted their terms, warning them of the dark cost of breaking their word. Moses then established 6 cities of refuge, 3 east of the Jordan, 3 in Canaan, sanctuaries for those who accidentally killed someone, shielding them from bitter revenge until they stood trial. Numbers 35 explains this clearly. "You must designate safe places to serve as refuges, so anyone who takes a life by accident can run there seeking shelter from the avenging families, saving them from death before they stand trial before the community." Additionally, 48 towns were set aside for the Levites who held no land of their own. These cities, scattered throughout all the tribes, allowed them to serve as teachers of the sacred law across the entire land. This new order showed a profound shift, transforming the people from a wandering desert tribe into a structured, settled nation, complete with their own laws and spiritual centers, ready for this new chapter of life. But as Moses drew his final breaths, a critical question arose. Who would lead them? Moses pleaded with the Creator, asking the Lord of all human spirits to appoint a new leader over this community, one who will guide them in all they do, leading them out and bringing them back safely, so that God's people will not wander like sheep without a shepherd. In Numbers 27, the divine response was unmistakable. "Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man of deep spirit, and lay your hand upon him. Stand him before Eleazar the priest and the entire community and commission him publicly." By this point, Joshua had already proven himself as Moses' trusted assistant and a fierce commander against Amalek. He was also one of only 2 faithful spies. Now the massive transfer of authority had to be done openly. Doing exactly as commanded, Moses took Joshua and placed him before Eleazar the priest and the whole assembly. He laid his hands upon him and commissioned him as written in Numbers. This laying on of hands symbolized the transmission of power and the spirit of divine wisdom needed to lead. Yet Joshua would never possess the absolute spiritual authority of his master. While Moses spoke to the Creator face to face, Joshua had to seek guidance through Eleazar the priest, who would consult the mysterious Urim to know the divine will. This crucial boundary preserved the peerless legacy of Moses as the covenant mediator and unmatched prophet. This seamless handoff ensured stable leadership while still honoring the singular magnitude of Moses. Joshua was meant to be a battlefield commander, leading the brutal conquest rather than a prophet receiving raw, direct revelation. This clear boundary helped the nation guard the sacred law long after Moses was gone. The book of Deuteronomy captures his final urgent speeches, delivered on the windy plains of Moab, where Moses spoke his final words to assembled Israel east of the Jordan 40 years after their escape. The very name Deuteronomy means the second law, not a brand new code, but a deep rehearsal of their sacred contract for a new generation poised to cross the border. His opening address traces the long, painful path they took from Mount Sinai, exposing both God's relentless mercy and their own repeated betrayals. He reminds them, "Your God leads the way and will fight for you just as you saw him do in Egypt and throughout that terrible desert where he carried you gently like a father holding his child." Yet even after all that, you refused to trust him. This raw confession had two goals: to warn the young generation against repeating the sins of their parents, and to prove that crossing into the land was a gift of pure grace, not their own achievement. Deuteronomy makes this clear because he loved your ancestors. He chose you, clearing out empires far stronger than yours to bring you here and hand you this earth as your inheritance. Moses then rebuilt the bedrock of their faith, repeating the 10 Commandments to the people. Deuteronomy. In chapter 5, a subtle shift occurs. While Exodus grounds the holy Sabbath day in the beauty of creation, this telling ties it to freedom, reminding them that they were once helpless slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God rescued you from captivity. And because of that, he commands you to guard and keep the Sabbath day in Deuteronomy 5:15. This links our inner freedom directly to our deepest obedience, leading to the ancient Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love him with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength. This command from Deuteronomy 6:4-5 demands total devotion, shattering empty mechanical rituals to demand a true relationship of the heart. This is the core covenant. To guard it, Moses warned against copying the dark practices of others. Deuteronomy 7:2-4 commands, "When the Lord hands them over, destroy their ways completely. Make no alliances, make no peace with their gods, and show no mercy, for they will drag your children away to serve illusions." But this sacred boundary was never about feeling superior to anyone else. Deuteronomy 7:7-8 explains, "He did not choose you because you were great or powerful, but simply because he loved you." This unearned grace rather than personal merit remains a central anchor for the fragile human soul. Moses warned that comfort breeds a dangerous amnesia. When we are finally full and satisfied, we forget our roots. You must thank the divine for the good things given to you. Take care that you do not forget your Creator, lest your hunger is satisfied, your ego swells, and you completely forget the Lord as warned in Deuteronomy 8:10-14. This warning exposes our tendency to trade gratitude for arrogance when life gets easy. Once stable, we drift. This first speech stresses the absolute need for constant guidance, as in Deuteronomy 6:6-7. Keep these words in your heart. Teach them with tireless devotion to your children. Speak of them when sitting at home, when walking along the path, when you rest and when you rise. This relentless teaching is a psychological safeguard, preventing the next generation from repeating the tragic errors of their ancestors. In his second speech, Moses formally renews the ancient covenant for those about to cross over. Deuteronomy 29:1 declares, "These are the words of the covenant which the Lord commanded Moses to forge with Israel and Moab, standing alongside the monumental covenant first sealed at Mount Horeb." This renewal met an urgent psychological need. The generation that witnessed the miracle of the Exodus was now dead. Their descendants had to claim this path for themselves. Moses showed them how absolute this commitment had to be. All of you stand here today before the Lord your God, ready to step into this sacred covenant so that he may secure you as his people and be your God, as spoken in Deuteronomy 29:10-13. This renewal laid bare a stark map of reality blessings for aligning with truth found in Deuteronomy 28, and curses for rebellion. These severe warnings filling the rest of the chapter foreshadowed a grim future of exile. The Lord will scatter you among all nations, from one horizon of the earth to the other, says Deuteronomy 28:64. Yet Moses offered hope far beyond judgment in Deuteronomy 31:3. When all these disasters strike and you finally turn back to your God, he will bring you home from captivity. He will have mercy and gather your scattered soul from every dark corner. This promise of restoration built a sanctuary of hope, an anchor during the nation's darkest nights of exile. In closing, Moses demanded a final existential choice I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, that I have set life and death before you, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, as written in Deuteronomy 30:19. This truth proved that our destiny is entirely shaped by our present choices. Moses also reminded them how close the truth really is. This path is not hidden from you, nor is it far across the sea. The word is incredibly near in your mouth and in your heart. Deuteronomy 30:11-14. This truth requires no heroic power, only a sincere surrender to what is already revealed. To seal these words, Moses sang a prophetic warning in Deuteronomy 32, witnessing against Israel in Deuteronomy 31:19. This song, meant to be memorized, predicted their future rebellion and inevitable fall, justifying divine law for generations. In his final act, Moses blessed the tribes of Israel in Deuteronomy 33, echoing Jacob's parting words. Deuteronomy 33 verse 1 begins, "Now this is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the people before he died." Unlike Jacob's heavy farewell, which carried harsh rebukes for his sons, Moses offered only unconditional hope, leaving his people with, "What if the greatest battles are within?" Facing the unknown, Moses blessed each tribe. He spoke to their unique character and destiny, ending with a final collective blessing. "How blessed you are, Israel! Who compares to you, a people saved by God? He is your protecting shield and your ultimate glory." According to Deuteronomy chapter 33 verse 29, Moses then climbed Mount Nebo as God commanded. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verses 1-4 describes Moses climbing Pisgah, where the Lord showed him the vast land. The Creator told him, "This is the country I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I let you see it with your own eyes, but you will not cross over." Yet simply gazing at the promised horizon, even without entering, was a profound gift. For Moses, whose entire life was driven by this quest, seeing the destination before dying was a mercy of ultimate closure. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verses 5 and 6 says, "Moses, God's servant, died in Moab and was buried in a hidden valley, but to this very day his final resting place remains a secret, perhaps to stop people from turning his tomb into an idol." It was a fitting shield for a man who always pointed others toward God. Even in death, his strength remained unyielding. At 120 years old, Moses had sharp eyes and unbroken vitality, as noted in Deuteronomy. Chapter 34, verse 7 suggests his departure was a deliberate divine transition, not a slow physical decay. The nation entered a season of deep grief, weeping for their fallen leader for 30 days, according to Deuteronomy. Chapter 34, verse 8 shows this time of mourning as a bridge between two very different eras. His ultimate tribute remains written in sacred history. No prophet has ever risen since who knew God so intimately. They stood face to face, working legendary signs and wonders, revealing unmatched power and terrifying deeds before all eyes. As Deuteronomy chapter 34 verses 10 to 12 notes, this legacy would echo through generations. Throughout time, his shadow loomed large, waiting for another true visionary to guide them home. Deuteronomy chapter 18 verse 15 hints at this. Soon Joshua, son of Nun, stepped forward. He carried a rare spirit of wisdom passed down through the touch of Moses, and the people followed. Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 9 shows him rising with clear authority. With Moses gone, an era ended. A shattered group of fleeing slaves had slowly forged a destiny. They became a unified nation, bound by sacred law, identity, and profound purpose. Yet, Moses himself never saw the promised land, but his vision and the sacred teachings he passed down secured their future. These wisdom texts would anchor their collective soul for generations, a spiritual blueprint for survival. It fulfilled his deep prayer in Psalm 90 verse 16. Let your radiant glory be revealed to your children. And verse 17 attributed to Moses. With his passing, Joshua took the mantle, carrying a new command. Joshua chapter 1 verses 6 and 7 records, Be strong and courageous, for you will lead them home to inherit the land promised to their ancient ancestors. Only be brave and careful to follow the sacred law. This threefold call to courage was a reminder that victory is won through faith, not just force. The coming conflict would demand deep inner surrender, absolute trust, and completely aligning ourselves with a higher law. Joshua immediately organized the camp, ordering the officers in Joshua chapter 1 verse 11 to prepare. Gather supplies, for in 3 days we cross this river to claim the inheritance promised to us. To secure the crossing, they sent 2 secret scouts into the walled city of Jericho, their first test. There they found shelter with an unlikely ally, a woman named Rahab living on the very margins. In Joshua chapter 2 verse 11, her confession reveals an unexpected faith shaking her world. Our courage utterly dissolved when we heard of you, for your God rules the heavens and the earth. Her confession secured a secret pact. The scouts promised safety for her household, a lifeline in the coming storm. All they required was her silence and a simple scarlet thread tied to her window as a marking. Then came the flooded Jordan River, a raging barrier testing if Joshua possessed the same leadership. Joshua chapter 3 verses 15 and 16 describes the priests carrying the Holy Ark. As they touched the river, the rushing waters froze upstream, rising like a wall of pure glass. Those flowing to the sea were cut off, a sign that our deepest barriers can vanish forever, changing both friends and foes. Those descending toward the salt sea were utterly cut off. This miraculous event left a profound mark on both the Joshua chapter 4 verse 14 records that on that day, the Lord exalted Joshua before all Israel, and they stood in awe of him, just as they had of Moses. To burn this crossing into their collective memory, Joshua ordered 12 men, one from each tribe, to gather stones from the dry riverbed and plant them at Gilgal as a lasting monument, a physical sign for the soul. When your children ask what these stones mean, you will tell them how the waters of the Jordan split wide open before the ark of the Lord's covenant. In Joshua chapter 4 verses 6 and 7, at Gilgal, Joshua renewed the covenant with 2 raw rituals. First, he circumcised every man born in the desert, restoring a symbol of identity long neglected in their wandering. Second, they celebrated the Passover. The children of Israel camped at Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. Joshua chapter 5 verse 10. These deep actions declared that Israel was finally claiming their promised territory as a bound people, carrying ancient commitments forged in the Exodus fire. As Joshua approached Jericho, he faced a mysterious encounter recorded in Joshua chapter 5 verses 13 and 14. As he neared the city, he looked up to see a stranger standing before him, a drawn sword flashing in his hand. Joshua stepped closer, asking, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" He replied, "Neither, but as commander of the Lord's army, I have now arrived." This shadow figure, perhaps God in human form, or an angel, delivered a bizarre siege strategy for Jericho. March around the city, all your men of war, circling it once. Do this for 6 days. On the 7th day, march around it 7 times, while priests blow the trumpets. When you hear that long, haunting blast of the ram's horn, every soul shall raise a massive shout. Joshua chapter 6, verse 5. This odd tactic proved that victory would come through spiritual alignment, not human force. Following these bizarre orders to the letter, Joshua chapter 6 verse 20 records the heavy climax. The people cried out, the horns blared, and when the crowd heard that deafening sound, the towering walls collapsed flat. The army charged straight ahead, capturing the city. Every house was systematically leveled, except for Rahab and her household. Joshua spared Rahab, the outcast woman of the night, along with her entire family. She had sheltered the Hebrew spies in Jericho, and her bloodline continues to live among the Israelites to this day. Joshua chapter 6, verse 25. Her survival and adoption into the nation pointed to a future where outsiders find a home. But their next assault against the city of Ai ended in a sudden, bloody defeat. The dark cause was hidden betrayal. A man named Achan had secretly stolen forbidden treasure from Jericho's ruins. Joshua chapter 7 verses 11 and 12 explains Israel has sinned, taking devoted things, stealing, and lying. That is why the Israelites cannot stand before their enemies. After exposing and punishing the traitor, Joshua deployed a clever tactical ambush against the city of Ai, saying, "Take the city, for the Lord your God will hand it over. Once you capture it, burn it to the ground." Joshua chapter 8, verses 7 and 8. The victory rebuilt their shattered confidence, teaching a profound truth. Triumph depended as much on spiritual alignment as on military strategy. Israel's sudden conquests terrified the surrounding nations of Canaan. While some kings prepared for bloody war, the people of Gibeon chose a clever mind game. Joshua chapter 9 verses 3 and 4 records how, hearing of Jericho and Ai, they devised a desperate trick. They sent a delegation with donkeys carrying frayed sacks and split, patched-up wineskins. By putting on this act of pretending to come from a distant country beyond their borders, they secured a peace pact. Joshua made a covenant of peace to spare their lives, and the leaders swore an oath. Joshua chapter 9 verse 15. But the decision was rushed. They did not seek God's counsel. Joshua chapter 9 verse 14. When the lie came to light 3 days later, they honored the sacred oath. But the Gibeonites were reduced to being wood gatherers and water carriers for the altar. Joshua chapter 9 verse 27. This intense commitment to keeping your word even when tricked established an ironclad integrity that would shape all their future alliances. Yet this pact sparked a major military backlash. 5 Amorite kings formed a dark alliance against Gibeon, who begged Joshua, "Do not abandon us, come up quickly and save us." Joshua chapter 10 verse 6. Israel responded instantly, launching a grueling night march from Gilgal to Gibeon that took the enemy completely by surprise. In this clash, one of the most breathtaking events of history unfolded. Joshua chapter 10 verses 12 and 13 records his cry, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun, what if the cosmos itself paused for a human war? The sun stood still, the moon froze until vengeance was complete. Daylight lingered for nearly 24 hours, an eerie pause in time that secured their final absolute triumph. This was a direct blow to those worshipping the sun and moon, proving who truly commanded the heavens. Soon a massive northern alliance rose up, led by King Jabin of Hazor, as described in the ancient texts. An army thick as seashore sand, bristling with horses and iron chariots, loomed over them, an impossible, terrifying nightmare. Yet a voice broke through the panic, telling Joshua to fear not, promising victory by this exact hour tomorrow. The brutal clash at the waters of Merom shattered the enemy, breaking the back of Canaan's organized resistance. But the land was not yet won. Joshua was forced to wage a long, grueling war against these kings. Even after years of bloody campaigns, vast pockets of territory still lay unconquered, wild and defiant. Then, as the old warrior neared his end, the divine voice spoke once more, telling him his time was short. You are advanced in years, yet so much of the map remains untamed. It was time to divide what was left. They divided conquered and wild lands alike, a bold act of faith in their future. This sacred work unfolded at Shiloh, where the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, now stood in quiet majesty. They followed an ancient, meticulous plan mapping the wilderness into 7 distinct territories. Bring the maps to me, Joshua commanded, and I will cast sacred lots before our God to decide your inheritance. This was no game of random luck, but a deep surrender to a divine, unseen order. The land division honored both ancient patriarchal blessings and their current reality. But before the tribes drew lots, Caleb stepped forward to claim a forgotten promise. 45 years have passed since the Lord spoke, Caleb declared. And today, at 85, I am still standing. Give me the treacherous hill country promised to me, the very place where the giant Enochites build their fortresses. Though their cities are massive and fortified, with God at my side I will drive them out as promised. This bold request proved Caleb's unwavering grit, willing to fight giants even in his twilight years. These were the same towering monsters that had terrified their ancestors 40 years ago. To curb blood feuds, Joshua set up 6 sanctuary cities where those who took a life accidentally could flee. It was a safe haven, protecting the unintended killer from the fury of grieving relatives. These sanctuaries, split evenly across the Jordan River, kept justice from turning into blind rage. Alongside these 48 cities were given to the priestly tribe of Levi. Each tribe carved out towns and pastures from their own land, sharing their inheritance as commanded. This strategic scattering kept spiritual guides close to every single household. With the borders settled, Joshua dismissed his loyal eastern battle brothers. The tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh were finally free to return to their homes across the Jordan. They had fought bravely, keeping their ancient vow to stand by their brothers until the end. You have kept your word, Joshua told them. But on their journey back, trouble flared. They built a massive altar by the river, sparking immediate panic and accusations of betrayal. A tense delegation rushed to confront them, demanding, "What is this rebellion against our God? Why build your own altar, unless you intend to break away from our sacred covenant?" But it was all a tragic misunderstanding. The stone pile was never meant for sacrifice. It was a witness of unity designed so that future generations would never say, "You have no share in God." They named the altar Witness, a symbol of shared identity, despite being split by a river. As his own death approached, Joshua gathered the entire nation for one final haunting warning. "I am fading fast," he whispered. "But you have seen how the divine hand fought for you. Your battles were won not by your own strength, but by the unseen force that goes before you." He warned them against losing their identity, begging them not to blend into the surrounding cultures. "Do not adapt to their ways," he pleaded, "nor let the names of their gods stain your lips. For a covenant is a mirror divine. Loyalty demands our own daily unwavering devotion. Why do we keep returning to the places where we first broke?" At Shechem, Joshua forced Israel to face their past. He traced their lineage from Terra's pagan shrines to their current victories, showing an unbroken thread of divine destiny. This ancient legacy of grace set the stage for a terrifying choice recorded in Joshua 24, verse 14 to 15. Throw away your old gods. Choose right now whom you will serve with absolute truth and absolute sincerity. But as for me and my family, we choose the Creator. The crowd roared back, swearing they would do the same. For He is our God. Right then Joshua bound their promise, writing their vows into stone and memory. He established sacred decrees at Shechem, recording these heavy words directly into the book of the law of God. To seal this, they raised a massive stone monument. But soon after, the great leader Joshua had to face death. The son of Nun, the Lord's faithful servant, died at 110 years old. Buried in Timnath-Serah, his passing marked the end of an era. Yet another ancient shadow still lingered. The bones of Joseph, carried all the way from Egypt, were finally laid to rest at Shechem. This fulfilled an ancient promise, bringing a symbolic end to their long, grueling desert wandering. For a time, peace held. The people remained faithful while Joshua and his older companions were still alive. But this spiritual anchor was fragile. Once they passed, a dark, chaotic storm began to brew. With the conquest eyewitnesses gone, Israel slipped into the terrifying age of the judges, losing their way. The root of their undoing was a half-hearted surrender. They failed to fully clear out the old compromises. They let the native tribes remain living right alongside them. A slow, moral poison left completely untouched. Across every tribe, the story was the same: a collective failure to honor their sacred boundaries. This compromise triggered a psychological decay described perfectly in the second chapter of Judges. The elders died, and a new generation arose who had never witnessed the miracles that set them free. Left in the dark, they abandoned their spiritual calling, turning instead to the seductive earthly altars of Baal. They forgot the power that rescued them from slavery, trading their identity for the gods of their neighbors. The real threat was the worship of Baal and Asherah deities, promising control over rain crops and sex. These dark cults offered material prosperity, masking base desires as sacred worship. To exhausted farmers scraping by in a harsh wildland, this bargain felt practical. The result was a quiet compromise, blending the worship of the Creator with ancient pagan magic. They did not explicitly reject their Creator. Instead, they quietly added lesser, easier gods to the mix. This betrayed their core identity while leaving them politically fractured and leaderless. As the ancient text warns, there was no king, and everyone did whatever felt right to them. The tribes drifted as a fragile confederation bound only by blood, but lacking any central anchor. With no unified defense, they lay completely exposed to both external armies and inner moral decay. Whenever the pressure became unbearable, charismatic tribal defenders rose up to hold back the chaos. Yet these heroes were only temporary fixes, unable to heal the deeper wounds of the nation. This tragedy repeats itself in a haunting, endless loop that mirrors our own modern struggles. First comes the betrayal, as they choose what is easy over what is true and right. Then comes the inevitable crash, being crushed by the weight of their own choices, followed by a desperate plea. Rescue arrives through a flawed savior, bringing a brief moment of peace before the next descent. Each time the savior died, the spiral began anew, pulling them deeper into the abyss. This was not divine cruelty, but the inevitable heavy cost of their own compromised choices. By erasing their unique identity, they invited the very chains they had once escaped. Relief only bred complacency, restarting the wheel of suffering. We see this play out over and over. Through 6 dark cycles, the ancient text maps out our endless struggle with our own shadows. Each collapse is faster, each period of peace shorter, and the moral compromises far more severe. This haunting cycle became the lens for all that followed. A nation's ultimate fate then as now depends entirely on keeping its covenant with the truth. National disasters shadow our spiritual betrayal, while peace only returns with alignment. Yet through this endless loop, a haunting pattern emerges. God's quiet loyalty set against our own restless betrayal. Even in our darkest eras, the ancient promise remains. I will never break my covenant with you. God never fully turns his back on us, stepping into our chaos whenever we turn back, proving both justice and mercy. This dark chronicle reveals 12 different deliverers, focusing on 6 key figures. The first, Othniel, set the standard. When the desperate people cried out from their dark abyss, a savior was raised. Othniel, upon whom the spirit of the divine fell. He brought justice back and led them to war. Under his quiet command, Israel crushed the Mesopotamian oppressor, securing 40 years of rest. Then came Ehud, the second judge, who used a strange, deadly strategy against Eglon, king of Moab, who had crushed them for 18 years. Ehud was left-handed, a trait that made him quietly lethal. Weaponizing this hidden trait, he slipped close. Ehud reached out with his left hand, drawing the blade from his right thigh, and buried it in the tyrant's flesh. This shocking strike rallied the nation to crush Moab, ushering in 80 years of quiet. Then came Deborah, the only female judge, who stood against King Jabin and his ruthless general Sisera. Holding court under her famous palm tree, she offered wisdom to a desperate, broken people, seeking justice. Driven by divine vision, she called on the warrior Barak, and together they raised an army to face Sisera's 900 iron chariots. Triumph arrived not through force, but an unexpected hand. Following his army's ruin, a terrified Sisera fled to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber. As he slept in deep exhaustion, Jael quietly took a heavy tent peg and a hammer, creeping close to drive it through his temple, deep into the dirt. Years later, Gideon received his divine call, while hiding in a shadow, secretly threshing wheat inside a winepress to escape the Midianites. Filled with intense self-doubt, he asked how he could ever save Israel. My clan is the weakest, and I am the least of my family. Yet after receiving miraculous signs of assurance, Gideon gathered an army. Yet in a shocking move, God slashed his troops from 32,000 down to a mere 300 men. This stripped Israel of all pride, ensuring they could never claim they saved themselves. This tiny band waged psychological warfare. With torches hidden in jars and shattering trumpet blasts, they routed the Midianites, bringing 40 years of quiet. Tragically, Gideon later forged a golden idol that trapped both him and his household, proving how even triumphant leaders can compromise the very sacred purity they once stood to defend, originally upheld. Then came Jephthah, born of a prostitute and driven away by his own cruel half-brothers. But when the Ammonites threatened ruin, the desperate elders of Gilead begged the outcast warrior for help. His rise to power was stained by a tragic, reckless promise. If victory is given to me, whatever first walks out of my front doors to greet my return will belong entirely to the divine, offered up to the flames as a burnt sacrifice. After his great triumph, it was his only daughter who ran out to meet him, triggering a devastating personal tragedy. It warns us of the horror of blind promises and a shallow, twisted view of what God truly desires. The last judge, Samson, reflects the deep darkness of this era. Set apart from birth as a Nazirite, he held superhuman power alongside profound moral decay, weaving sacred gifts with relentless personal flaws. His fatal weakness was his obsession with foreign women, breaking his sacred vows. Following a sequence of clashes driven by bitter revenge rather than holy duty, his enemies finally trapped him when Delilah pried away the secret of his strength. blinded, chained, and mocked as a toy for his captors. Samson finished his path in a final crushing sacrifice, taking down more foes in death than in life. Their stories show a timeless truth. The divine works through deeply flawed souls to rescue us. Our glaring weaknesses prove that true salvation never comes from our own talent, but from above. The closing chapters of this book reveal a descent into absolute spiritual darkness. These chilling accounts do not follow the order of history, but paint a portrait of pure social decay. They act as a warning of what happens when we abandon all truth and fall into moral anarchy. We see this in Micah, a man who built a private shrine with a stolen silver idol in his house. This man, from the hills of Ephraim, crafted sacred garments and pagan statues, installing his own son as a false priest. He then hired a wandering Levite, blending sacred faith with empty ritual. Worshipping through idols, this customized, blended religion completely shattered the sacred order of the official temple law. Yet the text offers no direct blame, showing how normal this decay had become, tolerated back then. But things grew even worse when desperate warriors from the tribe of Dan, seeking land, plundered Micah of his carved gods and kidnapped his priest. They took everything he had made along with the priest, as recorded in Judges 18. There they set up a pagan shrine that lasted for generations to come. The next story details an unspeakable crime in Gibeah, land of Benjamin. A traveling Levite sought shelter there, but depraved locals surrounded the house, demanding him. Instead, his helpless companion was thrown to them. When she died from their abuse, the Levite carved her body into 12 pieces, sending them to the tribes. Everyone who saw it gasped that such an atrocity had never been witnessed since the dawn of their nation, since the day they left the land of Egypt. This shocking event, recorded in Judges 19:30, sparked a brutal civil war. When the Benjamites refused to surrender the killers, the other tribes rose up, nearly wiping Benjamin off the map, leaving only 600 survivors. Fearing the complete loss of a brother tribe, they hatched desperate schemes to find wives for the survivors, including the shocking abduction of young girls during a festival in Shiloh. These grim accounts expose how, without any central authority or loyalty to their covenant, the nation sank into a moral abyss rivaling the wickedness of the Canaanites they were meant to replace. The recurring warning in those days there was no king suggests a monarchy, though never God's original plan, became the only cure for this raging moral and spiritual chaos. The shift from lawless judges to powerful kings unfolds through the life of Samuel, a man who became priest, prophet, and supreme judge. His journey begins with the desperate tears of his mother Hannah, who promised to give him to God if she were blessed with a son, praying, "I will give him to the Lord all his days," in 1 Samuel, chapter 1, verse 11. Born from a mother's tears, the boy was taken to the tabernacle at Shiloh to grow up under the old priest Eli. This stood in sharp contrast to Eli's own wicked sons, who were utterly worthless. They had no respect for God, as 1 Samuel chapter 2 records. Their greed was a symptom of spiritual decay. The young boy received his calling early. 1 Samuel chapter 3 notes that God's voice was rarely heard back then. Visions were rare. This silence revealed a painful rift between the Creator and his people. One night God called the boy's name. Samuel kept running to Eli until the old priest realized who was speaking. With this revelation, Samuel's first prophecy was a terrifying doom pronounced on Eli's family, warning that God would execute his ultimate sentence, recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 3. This terrifying word established Samuel as an undeniable prophet. From the northern borders of Dan down to Beersheba, the whole nation recognized his sacred, divine calling, and soon that dark prophecy came to pass. The Philistines crushed Israel in battle, capturing the holy Ark of the Covenant and killing Eli's sons. Hearing the devastating report, the fragile old priest fell backward, breaking his neck. He died instantly. This crushing disaster ended the sanctuary at Shiloh, clearing the path for Samuel's incredible rise. But after 7 months of strange plagues and terror, the Philistines finally surrendered the sacred chest, and its returned to Israel. Seizing the moment, Samuel called the entire nation to purge their hearts, pleading with the tribes to turn back to God with all their soul, throwing away their foreign idols and the pagan ashers. This call, recorded in 1 Samuel chapter 7, stirred the people. Guided by their new prophet, the repentant nation smashed their idols and gathered at Mizpah to confess. Hearing this, the Philistines launched a sudden attack, but heaven intervened. A massive, terrifying thunder roared from above, throwing the invading armies into complete panic and routing them before Israel, as told in 1 Samuel chapter 7. To honor this miraculous victory, Samuel raised a monument called Ebenezer, the Stone of Help, declaring that God had rescued them, a moment recorded in 1 Samuel. With peace restored, lost cities were reclaimed, and the borders grew quiet. For many years to follow, Samuel ruled as judge, traveling a yearly loop through Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, while keeping his home in Rar. As old age crept in, he appointed his sons to rule, but they abandoned his path, chasing greedy payouts, accepting bribes, and twisting justice, as recorded in 1 Samuel. Their corruption sparked an unexpected demand for political change. The elders of the nation confronted Samuel, warning that his age and sons failed. Why do we beg for masters? Appoint us a king to judge us like all the other nations. Grieved by this plea, Samuel heard a quiet voice in the dark telling him to yield, but with a warning. Centralized power carries a dark cost. He told them, this ruler will take your sons and claim your daughters for his court. He will seize 1/10 of your hard-earned harvest, and in the end, you will become nothing but his servants. But the warning fell on deaf ears. They cried out, no, we must have a king over us, to be like everyone else. This desperate cry revealed a deeper, modern sickness, our hunger to conform and hide in the crowd. It was the same old trap of trading freedom for comfort. With a heavy heart, the prophet Samuel yielded. He prepared to anoint their first king, ending the age of judges and launching a dangerous experiment. This new kingdom was a grand political test, yet it could not cure the deeper rot of the human heart. Their urge to bow to false gods and reject their true design would only find new, deadlier shapes. Decades of chaos and fleeting rescues had proved one thing they needed: something deeper than a temporary savior. They craved a lasting shield, but these ancient struggles are actually mirrors reflecting our own modern fears. Later prophets would whisper these tales as warnings of betrayal and reminders of a quiet, relentless grace. Even in total darkness, this legacy exposes the eternal war inside us, the pull between holiness and fitting in. It is the struggle between our highest calling and the safe embrace of the crowd. The path to this new empire started with a collective, desperate scream, "Give us a king to rule over us." It was a desperate plea to escape the terrifying responsibility of standing alone under the eyes of God. Samuel felt the sting of their rejection, but the Creator whispered, "Listen to them yield to their choice. They have not abandoned you, Samuel. They have walked away from me, refusing my quiet rule over them." He laid bare the cost of their security: forced labor, endless wars, heavy taxes, and lost freedom. Yet they begged for chains anyway. So Samuel was guided to a towering young man named Saul. The scriptures describe him as a breathtakingly handsome young man. No one in the entire land could match his striking and flawless presence. He stood head and shoulders above everyone else, the perfect picture of strength. In secret, Samuel poured the oil, He declared, "Has not the Lord chosen you to lead his precious heritage, to guide his fragile flock?" Miraculous signs confirmed the call, and soon, before a quiet assembly, the sacred lots fell upon him. His reign opened with a flash of fire. When a brutal enemy threatened the border, a holy fury woke. Saul rallied the tribes as one man. The shattering victory that followed secured his crown in blood. The crowd roared in triumph, demanding death for anyone who had dared to doubt their new king. But the golden image soon began to crack. Beneath the armor lay a deep, trembling insecurity. Terrified by a waiting game, Saul rushed to perform the sacred sacrifice himself, crossing a fatal line. Samuel confronted him. "In the dust, you have acted foolishly. Your kingdom will not endure the storm. Your reign is cut short." Soon another test exposed the rot in Saul's heart. Ordered to wipe out a bitter enemy, Saul kept the richest plunder and spared the fallen king. Caught in his lie, he offered a pathetic excuse. "I was afraid of the people, so I gave in." This fatal desire for approval cost him everything, revealing a man ruled by fear, not faith. Because you rejected the truth, the divine has rejected you as king. In the shadows, Samuel sought a replacement. He quietly anointed David, a mere boy watching sheep in Bethlehem. Here, the true metric of leadership changed. Mortals judge by what is visible, but the divine scans the hidden chambers of the human heart. While Saul descended into a dark, paranoid madness, David was brought into his court to play soothing melodies, a shadow prince comforting a fallen king. Then the boy's fame exploded across the hills. Facing a giant, David declared, "You rely on bronze and steel, but I come in a greater name." Today the whole world will witness that true power does not belong to the sword, but to the living spirit that sustains us all. But this victory ignited Saul's silent madness. The crowds sang of David's greatness, fueling the king's deep rage. Yet in the midst of this brewing storm, a profound bond grew between David and Saul's own son. Jonathan's soul was bound to David's. He loved him as his own life, a rare light in the dark. Why do we hunt our own shadows? Saul pursued David, forcing years of bitter exile. Yet David twice spared Saul, honoring sacred boundaries. May God forbid my hand strike God's chosen king. From 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 6. Soon Saul and Jonathan fell fighting the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. David cried out in grief, "How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain on your heights." From 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 25. David was then crowned, but only over Judah. For 7 years, Ishbosheth, Saul's last son, claimed the north, split by a bitter civil war. But when Abner and Ishbosheth were assassinated, the nation finally united. Every tribe came to David declaring, "We are your bone and flesh," from 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 1. David then conquered Jerusalem from the Jebusites, choosing a neutral strategic capital located between the northern and southern lands, free of tribal rivalries. To center their faith, David also brought the sacred Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. There they carried the Ark of the Lord and set it inside the tent David pitched, recorded in 2 Samuel chapter 6, verse 17. But when he planned a grand stone temple, God answered through the prophet Nathan with, "An eternal covenant. When your days are complete, I will raise up your descendant and establish his kingdom forever," from 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 12 to 13. This royal covenant anchored the hope of a coming Savior. On the battlefield, David pushed Israel's borders outward, conquering the Philistines, Moabites, and Ammonites. He built a strong government of scribes, priests, and generals. Yet at the height of power, David fell into dark sin with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. As 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 4 recounts, he sent messengers and took her sleeping with her. To cover his betrayal, he plotted her husband's murder, ordering Uriah to the front lines where fighting was fiercest, so that he would be abandoned and die. From 2 Samuel chapter 11, verse 15. Then Nathan confronted the king with a story of a rich tyrant stealing a poor man's beloved lamb. When David raged, Nathan pointed and shouted, "You are that man!" From 2 Samuel 12:7. David wept, "I have sinned against the Lord," and was forgiven. But tragedy followed. His child died and his own house collapsed into violence, rebellion, and bitter grief. Amnon violated Tamar, Absalom murdered Amnon, and then launched a treasonous revolt against his own father, dying in battle. Yet through this wreckage, David held the kingdom together, securing Solomon's throne and laying the groundwork for a golden era. But as David lay dying, his oldest living son plotted a coup, Adonijah declaring, "I will be king," from 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5. But Nathan and Bathsheba intervened, crowning Solomon instead and honoring David's sacred vow. Early in his reign, God gave Solomon a choice, saying, "Ask what you want," from 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 5. His reply showed profound humility, asking for a wise mind to guide the nation and know right from wrong, from 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9. Pleased, God gifted him unmatched insight, riches, and glory. This genius was tested when two desperate mothers both claimed custody of the same living baby. By offering to slice the child in half with a blade, Solomon revealed the real mother who chose to surrender her child so he might live, from 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 28. The nation stood in awe when they witnessed this masterful ruling, recognizing a divine spirit working within him to deliver true justice. To run the empire, he split Israel into 12 tax districts, supplying his royal courts effortlessly. He opened vast trade networks, partnering with King Hiram of Tyre to purchase raw timbers for his legacy. Solomon's grandest monument would be the construction of the sacred temple in Jerusalem. 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 1 dates this 480th year after leaving Egypt. In the 4th year of his reign, Solomon began building the Lord's house. 7 years later, this masterpiece stood finished, adorned with sacred treasures, like the golden altar, the menorah, and the showbread table. During its dedication, the Lord's presence filled the temple, as in 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 11. Solomon prayed, realizing no structure could hold God, saying, "Even heavens cannot contain you, let alone this house." I built from 1 Kings 8:27. He still pleaded with God to hear every seeker. Solomon's golden age mirrors our own search to find peace within our modern exile, hearing prayers directed to it from both citizens and strangers. Solomon's reign marked the very peak of Israelite. Can wealth blind a nation? 1 Kings 10:27 notes, "The king made silver common as stones, attracting foreign seekers, most notably the Queen of Sheba, who confessed that his incredible wisdom and massive prosperity far exceeded the rumors, as 1 Kings 10:7 notes." Ironically, this vast wealth sparked a spiritual decline. Solomon gathered 700 wives and 300 concubines through political alliances. 1 Kings 11:4 describes the tragic consequences as Solomon grew old. His wives seduced his heart toward other gods until he was no longer fully devoted to the Lord. He built pagan altars for foreign deities, including Chemosh of Moab and Molech of the Ammonites. This betrayal triggered divine judgment. God declared, "Since this is your attitude and you have broken my covenant, I will tear the kingdom from you, giving it to one of your subordinates. Yet I will not do this in your lifetime. I will rip it from the hand of your son." As 1 Kings 11:11-12 warns, this grim prophecy set the stage for the kingdom to fracture. His son Rehoboam faced an immediate crisis when the northern tribes demanded tax relief, crying, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us, so lighten our brutal labor and heavy yoke," says 1 Kings 12. But Rehoboam rejected the wise counsel of experienced elders, choosing the advice of aggressive young peers instead, responding harshly, saying, "My father scourged you with whips, but I will whip you with scorpions," as 1 Kings 12:14 warns. This sheer arrogance triggered a national divorce. What share do we have in David, or Jesse's son? "To your tents, Israel. Look to your own house," David cries. 1 Kings 12:16. Jeroboam, whom a prophet had already named as a future ruler, returned from exile in Egypt to lead 10 northern tribes, forming a new kingdom called Israel. Rehoboam kept control of only Judah and Benjamin, forming the southern kingdom of Judah. This political division soon triggered a deep religious schism when Jeroboam set up rival worship centers in northern Dan and southern Bethel, declaring it is simply not right for you to travel to Jerusalem. "Here are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt," records 1 Kings 12:28. These golden calves were meant to represent Yahweh rather than pagan gods, yet they violated the second commandment, directly competing with the sacred worship in Jerusalem. Jeroboam also established a rogue, non-Levitical priesthood and alternative festivals on the 15th day of the 8th month, a time of his own choosing, says 1 Kings 12:33. These rogue changes set a dark pattern of rebellion that would define the northern kingdom's history. To counter this deep spiritual rot, God intensified his prophetic voice. Unlike earlier prophets who primarily advised kings, these new messengers operated entirely independently, challenging corrupt systems and confronting national sin. Elijah embodied this fierce ministry in the north during the reign of Ahab, who married Jezebel and chose to serve and worship Baal, as 1 Kings 16:31 records. Elijah confronted Ahab, saying, "As the living God of Israel lives, there will be no rain these next years except by my word," says 1 Kings 17:1. After 3 dry years, a dramatic showdown occurred on Mount Carmel between Elijah and 450 prophets of Baal. Elijah challenged them, "How long will you waver between 2 choices? If Yahweh is God, follow him. If Baal, follow him," says 1 Kings 18:21. When Baal failed, but the Lord's fire consumed the sacrifice, the people fell crying, "The Lord, he is God," as 1 Kings 18:39 records. Elisha succeeded Elijah, performing wonders that proved the power of Israel's God, including purifying a Jericho spring, multiplying oil for a poor widow, and resurrecting a dead boy. In the southern kingdom, prophets like Isaiah walked alongside kings, offering both sharp warnings and profound encouragement. During the terrifying Assyrian invasion, Isaiah reassured King Hezekiah, saying, "Do not fear what you have heard, for the enemy will return the way he came," says 2 Kings 19:32-33. This promise was miraculously fulfilled when the Assyrian army was decimated. Yet they also offered hope beyond judgment, promising a future restoration and a brand new covenant, saying, "I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts," as Jeremiah 31:33 promises. This hope centered on the promise of an ideal king from David's line, "A righteous branch who will reign wisely," says Jeremiah 23:5. This warning voice grew crucial as both kingdoms slid toward final judgment, keeping the divine word alive through exile, providing a theological foundation for ultimate restoration. After the split, the north suffered constant chaos while the south maintained the stable line of David. Israel saw 9 dynasties and 19 kings over 2 centuries, as 2 Kings 15 vividly illustrates. Why does our inner peace shatter so easily? Scripture records 4 kings falling quickly, one murdered after just a month. Every northern ruler faced the same grim verdict he did. What was evil in the eyes of the Lord? Refusing to turn away from the sins of Jeroboam son of Nebat, who led Israel to sin, as 2 Kings chapter 13 verse 11 warns. This dark legacy of Jeroboam reveals our tendency to build alternative sanctuaries, defining the kingdom's compromised religious identity. This spiritual rot only deepened under King Ahab, who did what was evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who came before him, as 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 30. Swayed by Jezebel, he made Baal worship official, hunting down the true prophets of Yahweh. During this dark reign, we find a desperate cry. Elijah declared he was the only prophet left, while Baal had 450 in 1 Kings 18:22. Jehu's reforms temporarily reversed Baal's influence, destroying him from Israel, as 2 Kings 10:28 records. Yet he kept golden calves in Dan and Bethel. No reform was deep enough to alter their path. Still, the prophets warned against the coming collapse. Amos proclaimed that the days are coming when the Lord will send a famine on the land, not for bread or water, but for hearing the Lord's word, in Amos 8:11. Hosea used a marriage metaphor: she will chase her lovers, but not catch them, saying, I will return to my first husband, because things were better then, in Hosea 2 verse 7. The collapse came slowly. 2 Kings 15:29 records the first Assyrian victory in Pekah's reign, when Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria captured Ijon in Galilee, taking all the land of Naphtali, carrying them captive to Assyria. The final destruction came under Hoshea, the last king. 2 Kings 17 verses 3-6 recounts Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, marching against him, then invading the whole land surrounding Samaria and besieging it for 3 years. In Hoshea's 9th year, the Assyrian king captured Samaria, deporting the people of Israel to Assyria. The biblical verdict is clear about why this tragedy struck it. Happened because the people of Israel had sinned deeply against the Lord, walking in pagan ways and doing secret forbidden things against the Lord, in Kings 17, 7-9. Afterward, the Assyrians forced a population shift. The king of Assyria brought foreign settlers from Babylon into the towns of Samaria, as 2 Kings 17 verse 24 details. This mixed group blended their faiths, fearing God while serving their idols, as 2 Kings 17 verse 33 warns. They would become the Samaritans of the New Testament. Meanwhile, Judah, holding the royal line of David, found a more stable path than Israel, surviving for another 135 years. But while Israel's kings fell, some of Judah's rulers walked in light. They did what was right, as 2 Kings 18 verse 3 records. Yet shadows returned. King Asa banished the male cult prostitutes from the land and destroyed his father's idols, in 1 Kings 15 verse 12. His son continued these reforms, sending teachers into the towns of Judah with the book of the law of the Lord, as 2 Chronicles 17 verses 8-9 records. Later, King Hezekiah tore down the high places, broke the sacred pillars, and cut down pagan poles. He even destroyed the ancient bronze serpent Moses made, because until then the people had burned incense to it, in 2 Kings 18 verse 4. Under his reign, the kingdom survived a terrifying siege when the angel of the Lord swept through and struck down 185,000 soldiers in 2 Kings 19:35. But his son Manasseh rebelled deeply, rebuilding pagan shrines, erecting altars to Baal, and worshiping the stars in the sky. He even sacrificed his own son in fire, practiced sorcery, read dark omens, and consulted mediums, as the writer of 2 Kings 21 verse 16 warns. He spilled so much innocent blood it filled Jerusalem from end to end. Though he repented in Babylonian exile, the deep spiritual damage was already done, as 2 Kings 23 verse 26 observes. God's fierce anger burned still because of the massive provocations of Manasseh. Decades later, his grandson Josiah led one final, desperate reform after the discovery of the Book of the Law during the temple's renovation. In response to the book's reading, Josiah made a covenant before the Lord to keep his commandments, reminding us to rebuild our own fractured souls. Can we cleanse our inner temple? Scripture shows him purging physical shrines, removing false priests, and restoring the Passover. Yet, despite these temporary fixes, Judah slid down the same dark path as Israel. Jeremiah cried out, "Look at you trusting in empty lies. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, then stand in my temple which bears my name, claiming you are safe?" Jeremiah chapter 7 warns that judgment is inevitable. Jeremiah warned this entire land will become a desolate wasteland, a horror, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon 70 years. Then the rising Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar completely transformed the entire region. In 605 BC, after defeating Egypt at Kish, the Babylonians seized total control over lands once ruled by Assyria. Daniel chapter 1 records the first exile happening in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah. That was when Nebuchadnezzar marched against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. The king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief eunuch, to bring in several noble Israelite youths, including those from the royal family and the aristocracy. Among them were Daniel and his 3 close friends. In 597 BC, after King Jehoiachin rebelled, a massive second exile began. 2 Kings chapter 24 tells how Jehoiachin, king of Judah, finally surrendered to the conquering king of Babylon. The enemy stripped away all the gold from the Lord's temple and emptied the treasures of the royal palace, dragging away 10,000 captives, including the city's leaders and bravest men. Among this displaced group was Ezekiel, who would hear his divine calling in Babylon. Jehoiachin's uncle Zedekiah was left behind as a puppet ruler. But he too eventually rebelled against Babylon. 2 Kings 24 records this last tragic revolt against the explicit warnings of Jeremiah, triggering absolute ruin. 2 Kings chapter 25 describes how Nebuchadnezzar marched his entire army against Jerusalem and trapped it behind siege walls. The city remained locked under siege until King Zedekiah's 11th year, when starvation broke their will. Forced to surrender, the king tried to escape but was captured. 2 Kings records his horrific end. They slaughtered his sons right before his eyes. Then blinded Zedekiah, bound him in heavy bronze chains, and dragged him to Babylon. Then the temple and city were completely leveled. They burned down the house of the Lord, the royal palace, and every grand home in Jerusalem, smashing the protective city walls to pieces. A third wave of exiles swept away most of the survivors, leaving behind only the poorest laborers to tend the soil, as 2 Kings records. Jeremiah, who chose to stay behind in the ruins, was set free by the conquerors. Yet after the governor was assassinated, the remaining survivors panicked and fled to Egypt, dragging Jeremiah along against his will. Lamentations chapter 1 captures this raw agony. How lonely sits the city that once overflowed with people. She has become like a grieving widow, she who was queen among nations. In Babylon, the captives built new communities, forging a fresh spiritual identity without their temple, their land, or their freedom. Psalm 137 captures their deep grief. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept, remembering Zion. How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? This catastrophe sparked a profound crisis of faith. Why did God permit the burning of his temple and the ruin of his chosen people? The prophets offered a clear, painful answer. This exile was the direct consequence of a shattered covenant. Jeremiah explained, because they walked away from my law, ignoring my voice to follow their own stubborn hearts. I will scatter them across the nations, as Jeremiah chapter 9 warns. Ezekiel preached personal responsibility beside national guilt. The soul who sins is the one who dies. Yet this exile was meant as discipline, not total abandonment. Isaiah promised, for a brief moment I abandoned you, but with deep compassion I will bring you home. Jeremiah even gave a timeline. When 70 years are over, I will come to you and fulfill my promise to lead you back to this land. Marooned in a foreign country, the captives adapted, finding new ways to preserve their sacred identity without temple. Circumcision, keeping the Sabbath, and dietary habits became key markers, while the local synagogue grew as an essential home for scripture study and prayer. Later, Ezra would champion this shift as a scribe deeply devoted to the law of Moses. This painful era of displacement also sparked a revolutionary view of human suffering. The suffering servant of Isaiah showed that pain could heal. He was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our pain. The heavy price of our peace fell on him, and through his wounds we heal. Could our deepest wounds actually be the path to healing? Isaiah 53 verse 5. Ezekiel envisioned a new temple with healing waters flowing. Ezekiel 47. Jeremiah promised a covenant written on human hearts, not stone. Jeremiah 31. These profound hopes would carry the community through. Perhaps the deepest lesson of exile was a permanent cleansing from false idols. Before captivity, Israel constantly fell to the lure of foreign gods. Returning from Babylon, though other spiritual shadows remained, the worship of idols was never again a serious temptation. The trauma of exile seemingly cured that spiritual sickness. This legacy would deeply shape post-exilic Judaism. The community returned to the land under Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, rebuilding the temple and the ruined walls. Yet they would never taste absolute political independence again. They remained trapped under a succession of empires, Persian, Greek, and finally Roman. Through these dark centuries, they fiercely guarded their unique identity, haunted by the memory of exile as a warning against betraying the covenant. This silent era saw new movements rise, like the Pharisees and Essenes, each reading the scars of exile, differently applying them to their own circumstances. Meanwhile, messianic hope burned brighter, fueled by Daniel's visions of passing world kingdoms. Many cried out for the Son of Man to establish an eternal kingdom. When John the Baptist finally proclaimed, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near," his voice echoed with hopes forged in the furnace of the Babylonian exile. Thus, the shattering collapse of kingdoms, though devastating, served as a crucial, painful transition in the grand design of redemption. Israel's journey would continue, transformed by heavy judgment, guarded by sacred faithfulness, for a decisive role in a drama still unfolding. We have now reached the end of this incredible journey through the Old Testament, from Eden to exile. As we have seen, this narrative is no dusty history book. It is a mirror reflecting the fragile connection between God and humanity. With all its broken promises, judgments, and redemptions, this ancient story of God's people holds up a mirror to our own choices, showing the consequences of our failures, and above all, the unyielding mercy that meets us in our deepest exile. At every step of this journey, whether in Eden, the Ark, Sinai, Canaan, or the weeping rivers of Babylon, we see a Creator fighting to restore the broken bond with His creation. If this journey has stirred your soul and deepened your understanding of Scripture, help us share these reflections. Subscribe to our channel to walk with us as we explore truth that strengthens your faith and understanding. Share this video with friends and family who are searching, because these timeless truths deserve to be shared and reflected upon. Just as the ancients preserved their sacred whispers through generations of exile and hardship, we are called to pass on this spiritual legacy. By subscribing and sharing, you join a sacred chain of faith stretching back thousands of years. Until next time, may the ancient wisdom of Scripture light your path and guide your soul home.